Yaron Brook and then the current director of the Ayn Rand Institute are both Israelis, right? And
Yes.
I wonder why this is. And Ilan Jarno grew up in Israel as well, I believe, and he wrote a
Yeah.
book about this
So
Israel-Palestine conflict. So what is up with Israelis rather than Americans involved in the Ayn Rand Institute?
buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to my Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 186. I've got Wes Bertrand on here, who is a longtime podcaster. What's your podcast called again, Wes?
Complete Liberty.
Complete Liberty. He's been podcasting for well over 10 years now. We're going to talk about this current state of the objectivist movement, what I would call the growing objectivism to woke pipeline, but also the drifting of objectivism. Really, I would call it more the split that libertarians are now pro-liberty without being pro-reason, and objectivists have now become pro-reason, but they're not really pro-liberty, which I think hurts both movements. Certainly the Zionist hijacking of the movement and some other things. How are you, Wes?
Doing well, thanks. Nice to be on the show. And it seems like they have not integrated that rationality component with the political aspect of their philosophy. So the non-aggression principle, for instance, that's completely taken out of the equation when they start championing the fine work of the U.S. military, as well as the Zionist military in Israel, the IDF, IOF.
This is a very interesting development, Wes. I first read Rand in 1992 and I was 21, and I think you have a similar trajectory. When did you first read Ayn Rand?
1993. Yeah, like my uncle Steve gave it to me for a copy, a hardcover copy. It was the 35th anniversary edition, hardcover. And that was upon graduation from college. And I asked him, why didn't you give this to me when I was graduating high school? And he says, well, I didn't know if you were ready for it then. But that could have saved me a few years of confusion going through college and philosophy classes.
Yes. What college was that?
It was originally I went to Southern Methodist University in Dallas, and then I transferred back to Idaho, went to Idaho State University in Pocatello, Idaho.
Yes.
So that's just on the other side of the southern part of Idaho. Boise's on the western side and Pokey's over on the eastern.
Southern, yeah. Would you have I definitely considered myself a libertarian at the time. Would you have considered yourself a libertarian as well, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I still had this. Well, he gave me a little pamphlet about libertarianism.
Yeah.
I forget the name of the author, but I think he ran for president at one point.
Yeah.
Was it David Nolan or
David Nolan?
I can't remember. It's like, what is libertarianism? Berglund, maybe it was that. But there was just a little pamphlet about it, and I read through it all. I agreed with it all, but then I was hung up on the whole taxation thing and the governmental services, right? If you have governmental services, how do you make sure they're being funded, right? So then how do you make sense of taxation in that milieu? And so that was like a sticking point for me. And then when I read Atlas Shrugged, and simultaneous to that, I read Nathaniel Brandon's Honoring the Self, which helped me make sense of the characterizations that were going on in Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah, there were a lot of interesting.
And then, of course, the non-aggression principle is explicitly stated there too in Atlas Shrugged. And some say maybe libertarianism got it from Ayn Rand, but she was always wanting to eschew the libertarian movement because they didn't have an integrated philosophical system, right? They could be all over the map in metaphysics and epistemology and ethics. So then I remember talking to my uncle's friend when I was shoveling snow up in Sun Valley. He hired me and some of my buddies from college for a few weeks to shovel snow off the tops of houses there. And that was a hell of a workout. Let me tell you, you could put in like 7 hours a day and then you were crippled for the rest of the night. But some of my buddies from the track team and the football team, they lasted for a few days and they're like, we got to get back to our studies. Sorry. It was during Christmas break, I think. But I remember asking Joe Rohner was the guy's name. He was active in Libertarian Party stuff in Idaho, about this seeming contradiction about taxation. and then how Ayn Rand kind of wanted to resolve it with a voluntarily funded government. And then I asked Joe about the whole notion of government itself. Why do we have a centralized monopoly in charge of the very services that are the most important for human beings to ensure their safety and the nature of justice in a society? And he just kind of shook his head and says, "Yeah, that's a contradiction that Ayn Rand promoted, and to this day, objectivism is still promoting the contradiction of a monopolistic government
Yeah.
designed to rule over everybody." Even though every economist you talk to worth their salt will say, whenever you monopolize something, you get the highest priced good or service at the lowest quality because there's no competition allowed.
Yeah, and there's one, I think it was, I can't remember if it was Kinsella or somebody, and he pointed out, really logically speaking, it's interesting how much objectivists really don't like the United Nations, but because ideally objectivism has to be in favor of one world government. But
Yeah, that's kind of the logical conclusion.
yeah,
Government to rule them all, right? I was going to say one ring to rule them all, like Lord of the Rings. But yeah, there is
yeah,
this strange relationship with authoritarianism that underlies the objectivist philosophy in political. I mean, it's really coherent up until politics, and when this idea of government is advocated. And by the way, Ayn Rand thought that competition among governments in a marketplace would lead to gang warfare, right? So Yaron Brook, the former director of the Ayn Rand Institute, himself has said that anarchism or market anarchism, as anarcho-capitalists promote, is even worse than socialism and worse than fascism. Like the kind of world that they envision happening as a result of rights protecting agencies in a free marketplace is the
mhm.
opposite of the reality of the situation. People would have a vested interest in making sure they don't go to war. They aren't fighting each other. That's very costly for everybody, except for the government and the defense contractors, right?
True. Yeah, I suspect market anarchism would probably have some unintended consequences that we couldn't foresee either. I mean, it hasn't been tried, so I wonder if you can completely get away from all the contradictions. I know that sounds like maybe a pessimistic view, but I think that there's almost I sometimes find myself in contradictions, and I just don't know how I resolve them. It's
Yeah, well, that's kind of the reason I
can you
wrote
be
my
perfect?
first book.
Yeah, can you be perfectly consistent? I guess the question I ask, and it,
Yeah,
maybe it's something we should pursue. Yeah,
the
you know,
psychology of liberty is really the
yeah,
key there, and that was the title of my first book,
yeah,
wanting to integrate this non-contradictory political system with the rest of objectivism, essentially. Because
yeah,
the only objectivist that I knew of that I read about was Jarrett Wolstein. Jarrett Wolstein wrote a pamphlet, or might have been a book in size, called Society Without Coercion, or maybe that was in
yes,
a wider anthology. I can't remember. But anyway, he was championing as an objectivist an idea of a marketplace in which there are justice services that compete for people's business, essentially, to protect individual rights. I mean, their explicit
yeah,
mantra is we will protect and uphold individual rights and restore victims.
yeah, yeah.
So
Whatever
he was
happened to
able to think outside of that contradiction. But the rest of objectivism, David Kelly's group, were tolerant of people advocating that, but not the Ayn Rand Institute. They are
yeah,
completely diehard governmental fans, essentially. Like when I asked with some friends of mine, Yaron gave a talk in San Diego about 15 years ago, I think it was, in 2010. And the title of the talk was about capitalism. And he went on for like an hour extolling the nature of free markets and how they benefit everybody. It's a win-win and all that. But then when it got into the whole government thing, we asked him a question. I remember asking this question: is government a necessary or unnecessary evil? And he paused for a moment and he said, government is a necessary good, which is the exact same thing that the Marxists say, that communists say. That's the communist premise.
yes,
And so he thinks he's coming at it from an entirely different vantage point, that this government is really going to protect our rights because it's going to be filled with, objectivists, I guess, running the show, knowing what the non-initiation of force principle is, and non-aggression principle, the NAP. But it's belied by all of the historical accounts of what governments are. And as soon as you allow the power to lay and collect taxes, then all bets are off. Like, that contradiction erodes the nature of a free and just society.
Yes. Yeah, so that's where we are right now. So
Although he would
anyway,
say, because it's voluntarily funded, that's the real key to make that transition out of the coercive nature of government. They also think that government is going to be um, able to use force in a defensive fashion on behalf of everybody. Unless you didn't want the services, then you wouldn't pay, but then you wouldn't get the services. So you have two choices: either don't pay and be left to your own devices, which I actually would prefer. You know, I have plenty of weapons, and to ward off the petty criminals, that's easy, but you can't ward off the nature of government itself. How do you take government to a court of justice? You can't. You're sitting in their courts on their terms with their ball, their bat, their field, and their fans. This is an inherent contradiction that Mark Stevens used to rant about on the No State Project, his radio show, for many years. And Stéphane Molyneux would come on that show, as well as Jim Davies, who has a really useful educational program called the Online Freedom Academy, tolfa.us. And his vision is for people to go through that whole program of re-educating yourself about the nature of coercion, the nature of the domination system called government, so you can free your mind, and hopefully that will spread throughout society, and we can have the evaporation of government day. I think he predicted that would be in 2027, but we're quite a ways from that, aren't we?
it could be. Yeah. I want to make sure we stay on the topic here. Uh, I first, went to what I would call an objectivist event, was the seminar of the Institute for Objectivist Studies in 1995. That was what David Kelly called his group back then. It's now the Atlas Society, although he's not quite in the thick of it like he used to be. And that was a week-long seminar at the University of Wisconsin. That was about 110 or 115 people, and a mix of students and graduate students, and of course just regular people. Uh, it had evolved from just being an event for graduate students into something much larger. What was the first time you got involved?
Well, I met Nathaniel Brandon in 1995. I flew down to San Diego, and he gave a talk about his book, The Six Pillars of Self-Esteem. So,
Yep.
I had devoured all of the literature by Ayn Rand, and the Objectivist letters, the Objectivist newsletters. There was one called The Objectivist, and then the other one was the Objectivist newsletter, I think it was. And that contained all kinds of essays by all kinds of objectivists, including, who was the chairman of the Federal Reserve back in the day. You
Yeah,
remember him, right?
yeah. So
Who
yeah,
was the chairman of the Federal Reserve? Greenspan, right? So Alan Greenspan had written an article, and I think it's in Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, or it's in The Virtue of Selfishness. I can't remember. One of those anthologies. He wrote an article about the gold standard, I think it was.
that was Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. I don't think he had anything in the Virtue of Selfishness.
No, I guess not.
Golden
But
Economic
Brandon
Freedom.
did. Brandon did. So it wasn't until I got down to San Diego in 1998 that I started to mingle with some of the objectivists
Yeah,
in San Diego, as well as in Los Angeles area.
yeah. I think would that also have been Farsim Shadab? He was down there.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
remember Farson.
and I
Yeah.
think he was still. I think he was hooked up with Carolyn Ray for a while there too, but I'm not sure. There were.
Yeah, I remember playing splendid frisbee with Carolyn on the beach in La Jolla.
Whatever happened to her?
I don't know. I lost
Yeah,
touch after I moved out of San Diego in 2010.
yeah,
I've only been back a few
yeah,
times.
yeah. That's a name I haven't heard. Yeah, she was. Yeah, she had an interesting life. First of all, she was she was old. She was a lot older than she looked and acted. To her credit, she
I
seemed to
think
exemplify.
philosophy professor. I think she was doing philosophical
Yeah,
therapy with people, helping them understand how philosophy and those beliefs can lead to psychological ailments. And that's kind of my forte. I have this site, happinesscounseling.com, helping people make sense of this unfree world that we live in and the
yeah.
nature of the domination systems that we find ourselves amidst.
Well, I think that's what happens for a lot of people is you have this world that doesn't make any sense, and at least Ayn Rand says, "Well, this is how it makes sense," but then in some cases it can open up a different world of madness for you.
Mm,
Uh, yeah, and of course, not necessarily an objectivist, of course, but Stephen Cox is in San Diego as well.
hmm.
You know,
Yeah, I'm not
yeah,
sure I met him, but
yeah,
yeah.
I met him once. He was always long involved with Liberty Magazine, and of course, I re-released that published that later edition of God of the Machine. So and brought God of the Machine back to life. In fact, he wrote a book about Isabel Patterson too. So of course, he's the
Yeah,
author of God of the
Isabel.
Machine. But yeah, that's a book that definitely a libertarian classic that I think every libertarian should read is God of the Machine. She had a
Yeah,
lot of influence. She had a lot of influence on Ayn Rand, although I don't think Ayn Rand really acknowledged it later because she was religious. But
yeah,
so
Christian, I believe.
yeah,
But Ayn Rand was kind of a big tent in that regard. If she liked some of the perspectives of people that disagreed with her, such as Ludwig von Mises, right? He was kind of classical liberal in his rhetoric, at least, not exactly what would be called the laissez-faire capitalist, as the objectivists coined it.
yes. Well, considering how much, back then in the 60s, the Nathaniel Branden Institute, I'm pretty sure they sold a lot of his books because that was,
Mm.
they were reviewing books, selling books, and doing a lot of interesting things. When
Yeah.
did you first start to, and when did you first start to notice some of the problems in the movement? Some of
Yeah.
the things that real made you realize this isn't necessarily going to lead to the utopia that we hoped it would.
Yeah, well, at least the application of the principles uh, are not going to do that. The way they're being applied and the way they're being interpreted. So you might have heard of Brett Bear or Ben Bear, I think his name is.
Ben Berry, yeah, I think.
So
Ben Bayer.
I'm not sure, but he's at UT Austin now. I met him here last year, I think it was, and he recognized me. I
Oh,
didn't
yes.
quite recognize him.
Ben
Ben
Bear, like Bear
Bears.
aspirin.
Yes, I believe.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So so he was in that cohort of objectivists that I would argue with at objectivist sort of meetings in Los Angeles and sometimes in San Diego. But I think the San Diego group was really able to ferret out that contradiction about government itself. So they didn't double down on the collectivism stuff
Yeah,
because that's essentially what it's doing. It's basically saying that you have a right to have your rights protected by government. So they see government as this super ego, I guess, on society, keeping everybody in check. Otherwise, all bets are off, and it's total chaos along with the anarchy, right? So this idea of no rulers hasn't been sort of expunged from the belief system. That they see that there ought to be a ruler there in charge of rights protection, and that's of course a violation of rights itself because no one has that right. You can contract with people to protect your rights, but you do not have that right inherently. So I noticed that contradiction very readily in the objectivist encounters that I would have in Southern California. However, my friend Peter Voss, who's now here in Austin working still on developing artificial general intelligence, I think his site is IGO, or that's the name of the commercial branch he's got in that company. But he was friends with Nathaniel, and I got to know him through him. And Peter is also a voluntarist or a stateless society proponent, as well as understanding the objectivist principles. So he's really consistent in that regard. Um, picking up that thread that Jarrett Wolstein pointed out back in the day, and I think
yeah.
Roy Childs Jr. had an open letter about this as well, but he later recanted.
Well,
He
he wrote the letter Rand about your government must initiate force to maintain a monopoly.
yeah, which
That's it.
is plainly true.
Yeah. Incidentally,
So
whatever happened to Wolstein?
I don't know. This is a good question. I
Yeah,
just remember reading his stuff, and I think my uncle had a copy of his work on his bookshelf. My uncle had all these things. He went through the whole process of learning objectivism, and I think he went to the Nathaniel Branden Institute back in the day when Branden was given I think it was a 20-hour
yeah,
lecture series on objectivist
yeah.
principles. But
Mm,
so I also noticed that Nathaniel had become persona non grata in the Ayn Rand Institute world, essentially. Like
Yeah.
after Ayn Rand slapped him across the face and excommunicated him,
Yeah.
he was not to be really invited to anything or even recognized for the work that he'd done, even though Ayn Rand initially, she dedicated Atlas Shrugged to him,
Yes.
and then
It
switched to
was.
Leonard Peikoff because he was in line with what she was doing and didn't scorn her in the way that Nathaniel did with having, multiple, well, you could say there was one woman, Patricia, who became his wife, his second
Yes.
wife, that he was having an affair with. So
Yeah.
behind his wife's back and behind Ayn's back. And he's struggling with the virtue of honesty, which is a key virtue in objectivist ethics, right? And so here he is giving talks about objectivism and ethics and
Yes.
honesty, and he's just living with this massive contradiction and basically hit on his own
Yeah.
integrity. And he
Yeah.
wrote his memoir about this, Judgment Day, My
Yeah.
Years with Ayn Rand, to explain a lot of what was going on psychologically. So I thought that was fascinating, the psychological side of the philosophy of
Yeah.
objectivism and
Yeah.
how it is that people can actually change their views and adopt new evidence and new understandings from a logical point of view rather than being closed-minded about these things. And I saw early on, 20 some years ago, a lot of closed-mindedness in the objectivist community. Like some things are not to be accepted or agreed with and stuff, but nonetheless, Nathaniel was open to hearing Peter's views on a stateless society, and he would
Yeah.
talk to him about that, but he never really got rid of the contradiction of statism itself. And I remember an interview that Mark Stevens did with him back when he was really elderly. Like this was when he died in the mid 2000s, I think.
2004. Brandon died in 2014.
Yeah, 2014, around the time that Marshall Rosenberg died as well, another psychologist that I really
Yes.
impressed by. But back when he was in his early 80s, I think, is when Mark interviewed him. So he caught him off guard with a question about a stateless society. And Brandon couldn't really process that information in a way that was wholesome, shall we say. Like he still went back to those objectivist talking points. And that was the contradiction that he never ferreted out. So I think it's the lack of active mindedness that I see in the objectivist community to ferret out contradictions and go where the truth is, no matter what, where the evidence is, and so forth. And it leads to this present circumstance of the genocide. Like
Yeah.
they do not acknowledge that a genocide is happening before our very eyes, being live streamed. It is the most documented case of genocide that has ever been, perpetrated on
Yeah, it
human
is.
beings.
But one thing also, I mean, let's go back to the objectivist movement in the 90s. How much were people talking about Israel at all back then? I mean, I can remember on the
Not much.
discussion forums, I mean, Israel just never came up. The Middle East rarely, if ever, came up. I mean,
Yeah.
there it was just it just wasn't on anybody's mind. I do remember you're familiar with the Intellectual Activist, of course, probably the publication. I think that I don't know, was it Stubblefield or somebody put out,
Mm.
but they had that one interview that was like peak off on Bosnia and says, why are we getting involved? This is pure altruism. There's no reason for us to get involved in Yugoslavia or Bosnia. It's like, well, I agree with all this. Why are we getting involved in any of this? Because none of this is part of our rational self-interest. I mean,
Well, it depends on what your values are, right? If you value people in another part of the world that are being, genocided or massacred, then you have the right to assemble people to go help them, right? So the use of the royal we in objectivism really trips them up as well. Like this collectivist notion that we are going to Iraq, we are doing this, we are doing. So it's this conflation of Americans with their government. And this is what objectivists do all the time, unfortunately. Even though they're champions of individual rights, that collectivism, government is a necessary good thing, that really infects the way they view things and, is detrimental to making sense of it in a coherent way. So, yeah. But as far as the US government goes, a non interventionist perspective is what the founders outlined, right? Like
yeah,
entangling alliances with none, essentially, and having just free markets, free trade, even if it's just unilateral free trade. Like I heard recently that Biden is going to impose, what is it, a 25% tariff or 50% or 100% tariff on imported Chinese electric cars, right? And Trump is really big on tariffs as well, and
Yes.
restrictions on trade. And so all of that nonsense just flows from this monopolistic entity called government that thinks they can do whatever the fuck they want in the marketplace.
Yeah,
And of
there's
course, objectivists are on their heels regarding this because they're like, no, no, we didn't want government for that. We just want government to protect rights. But I guess that's a fantasy, right? It really
yeah,
is a fantasy because, again, you have a coercive monopoly in charge. So they're always putting the fantasy in the back of their mind and then talking about these policies to get to the point with Israel. Um, Yaron Brook and then the current director of the Ayn Rand Institute are both Israelis. Right. And
yes.
I wonder why this is. And Ilan Jarno grew up in Israel as well, I believe. And he wrote a
Yeah.
book about this
So
Israel-Palestine conflict. So what is up with Israelis rather than Americans involved in the Ayn Rand Institute? I'm curious
yeah,
about that.
and there's this great letter from Jefferson that I've always quote, I have ever deemed it fundamental for the US never to take active part in the quarrels of Europe. Their political interests are entirely distinct from ours. Their mutual jealousies, their balance of power, their complicated alliances, their forms and principles of government are all foreign to us. They are nations of eternal war. All their energies are expended in the destruction of the labor, property, and lives of their people. And, unquote. That was what Jefferson said about Europe. I don't see how the Middle East really is any different from Europe, really, although from what I read historically, maybe Europe has been worse. I don't see, I think it's often very hard to determine what the good guys are. And I just ask, okay, what's in it for us? I mean, having visited several countries, I certainly feel more sympathy for a lot of the countries I've visited. I mean, I'm definitely biased toward Armenia against Azerbaijan just because I've been to Armenia. And I'm definitely biased toward, Armenia and Azerbaijan's neighbor to the north that we call Georgia, but they call it Sakartvelo.
Hmm.
Uh, they say we're not Russians and we never will be. I mean, I told them, I'll go over and fight for you. I have Polish friends. I've told them I might fight for you too, because I think I think in some cases they're better than what's on the other side. But really, I think America was born of this attitude that we're going to be different from the rest of the world. And if we stay out of and staying out of it is a key part of keeping ourselves from becoming different. In a
Exactly.
way, we've turned our country has turned into Israel in some ways.
Yeah,
You know,
it's really amazing how it's attached at the hip, essentially. This Zionist agenda is part and parcel of the problem that we have with militarism, with imperialism. The fact that the US has over 800 bases
yeah,
around the world, acting as the world's policeman, like this is like Pax Americana,
yeah,
right? Like the Roman Empire. And I believe the empire is crumbling at this point because uh, so much truth is getting out about all this. A book about that base uh, number, by the way, is called Base Nation, written
yeah,
by a journalist. Pretty thorough investigation of the nature of this insanity, which is basically welfare statism for the military-industrial complex, military-industrial congressional complex. Some people have called it a self-licking ice cream cone, right? And the Pentagon has failed like the last 6 audits. They can't account for trillions of US dollars, many, many trillions, right? So
yeah.
this is something that objectivism in its current form as it's being proselytized doesn't come to terms with effectively. Like the only way you can do that is by striking at the root and saying, listen, this is a complete polar opposite of what we would have in a free market system. Like no one in their right mind would shovel trillions of dollars into military weaponry to kill other people and to develop nuclear weapons in the thousands to potentially destroy all of us. Like this is just collectivistic insanity. And there was an article that was, I think, on LouRockwell.com called "Objectivists are Genocidal Collectivists," because he's pointing out the end result of this.
There's been a few articles on Lou
Yeah, I
Rockwell.
think Hoppe linked to it when he was critiquing Walter Block's perspective, who is
Yeah,
a market anarchist otherwise, but a full-on champion of the Zionist agenda. at the expense of individual rights, basically, and at the expense of property rights.
Yeah.
Huron Brook got in a debate with Safa ad-Din Amos
Yeah.
about this whole issue, and Safa was trying to come at it from the perspective of property rights. Why don't objectivists stand for property rights? If you just look at it from that vantage point, then you can see what has happened from the Nakba on, when the
Yeah.
Israel, the Israel agenda, the state of Israel, the Jewish state or state for Jews, was created as an ethno-nationalist organization to make sure that they're going to be safe there. But in point of fact, it's gotten them to be the least safe place for Jews on the planet, despite
Yeah.
what Joe Biden says. He says the only safe place for Jews is in Israel, which just feeds more into this anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist, pro-Israeli agenda.
Yeah.
The whole back and forth about this stuff, it's undergirded by a whole bunch of fear, essentially. Are we going to be safe? And
And
the objectivists have this point of view that you're not safe until you lay waste to the supposed enemy, whoever you deem that to be.
Yeah.
And terrorists are like this constant boogeyman that states create to fight in perpetuity.
And I don't know. There seems to be that ever since that I guess ever since almost this attitude that because one Palestinian shot one Israeli, that means anything goes. So that justifies the appropriation of any Palestinian's property. That justifies the appropriation of any Palestinian's babies being killed. And
Yeah,
it's
collective
like,
punishment,
yeah,
right?
yeah, and it's like and it's all, and there's no proportionality on it either. It's like, okay, you killed one of our guys, so we have a right to kill 1,000 of yours, which is
Yeah,
kind of absurd. But I
it's
mean,
it's beyond it's beyond any semblance of understanding what justice means,
yeah,
right? That's the extent to which the objectivist community becomes genocidal collectivists, right? They are willing to sacrifice individual rights for the sake of trying to feel safe through violence, right? And this whole idea of achieving peace through violence, people harken back to like Lindsey Graham, for instance, recently was saying, well, we notice the royal we there coming from a politician. We nuked Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? That caused all kinds of loss of innocent life. And that somehow justifies what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians now.
and it wasn't, and and looking back, Eisenhower opposed that. They didn't even talk to MacArthur about it. It's something that even the military. I like to use the analogy of you're using a sledgehammer to kill a mosquito. Do you really need to use a sledgehammer to kill a mosquito? I mean, sometimes just taking a fly swatter or smacking him with a shoe will be enough. You don't need to.
Well, that doesn't put enough fear in the enemy,
Yeah,
supposedly. So that's the mindset of these objectivists, that you need to just keep on committing acts of violence,
yeah,
terrorizing entire populations. Essentially, that's what they're doing, state
yeah,
terrorism against populations, so that then they will never even think about fighting us again. That's the
yeah,
idea. That's the rhetoric you hear from these folks. And this is completely detached from reality, because terrorism survives because of injustices that are happening
yeah,
against various people in occupied territories, for instance. When you've got a military occupation that's going on in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza now, that's completely under siege and has been bombarded into smithereens, essentially. Like, don't expect those people to respect you
yeah,
after you do such things, right? I said on my podcast, listen, if you blew up my friends and my family, I would make it my life's mission to hunt you down, right? So I'm not a jihadist. I'm an objectivist,
yeah,
a consistent objectivist that advocates for individual rights and property rights. Without property rights, no other rights are possible, said Ayn Rand, right?
yeah,
So this idea that public property, that's another contradiction that objectivists have, is Rand said public property is a contradiction in terms, and private property is redundancy, right? So that by that standard, what is the property of government? Do they own anything, or are they somehow a property of the people? Which again is another collectivist notion. It doesn't honor property rights. So they're caught in a contradiction there with the idea of government, and using government for their ends, which is somehow to defeat terrorism. We're going to commit mass terrorism in order to get rid of terrorism. That makes zero sense, does it?
Yeah.
But from a psychological point of view, they don't care about the contradictions, right? Just as the Israelis don't when they, was it back in the 80s when they bombarded Lebanon?
They went into Lebanon in the early 80s. Yeah.
Yeah, 82, I think it was. That's where they formulated, I believe, the Dahia doctrine. Dahia was a place in around Beirut, I think, that the Israelis just laid waste to, like they've done with Gaza. And so this idea of collective punishment, we will just completely destroy any semblance of their capacity to do anything, even think about us. They're just going to fear us from now on. And I think it was Reagan that called him up and said, listen, this is looking like a Holocaust. What the fuck are you doing? Stop this. And they stopped it. Right.
Yeah, Reagan had an interesting, and of course, there was the Beirut bombing where we had about 250 Marines get killed, and Reagan pulled all those Marines out. It was there was no purpose in that, but you know, really, it's not all that much different from the attitude of the BLM protests 4 years ago. It's you have a drug addict who gets possibly killed by a police officer. We're not even really completely sure about the circumstances of that death. But then there's all these riots, burning down buildings and all this other stuff, all because some junkie gets killed by a police officer.
Yeah. So,
and I mean, yeah, and when somebody like this is glorified, like he's some kind of hero, where their culture is gone.
you mean like Netanyahu?
I'm talking about George Floyd.
Okay, but how does the BLM movement relate to Israel?
Well, their reaction is the same way. We'll finally do all this to end. And the truth is, I don't think they want this problem to end, because I think they want to have this constant rationalization for violence to be. I don't think they ever want to stop. I think it's just like a process of every 20 years or so, they just want to go beat somebody up and have a justification for it.
Yeah, the phrase they've got for Gaza, mowing the lawn or mowing the grass, right? Every so often you got to go do that, and it just led to some horrendous massacres. 2014, I think, was the last huge one that Max Blumenthal and Dan Cohen did a documentary about it called Killing Gaza. And as two Jews that went into Gaza to talk to people there, they were advised by Israelis that they're going to get butchered, right? You're not supposed to go into the Palestinian areas because those people want to kill you. So this othering of the Palestinians is part of this process as well. You got to put a lot of fear into the Israeli population that pretty much everybody in the Palestinian occupied territories, military occupation by Israel, all those people want to kill you as a Jew, not as an Israeli, not as a Zionist, not as an occupying force. And then they basically say there's hardly any innocence there because the terrorists are raised by people and families and so forth. And so they're all interrelated. And so it's just this creating enemy images of all these people to perpetuate this violent conflict forever and ever and ever. And it started, back in 1948, but even prior to that, when there was terrorist Israelis and terrorist Zionist terrorists that were causing all kinds of mayhem. The British Empire took over after the Ottomans got defeated, right? So you've got these colonizing militaries that are dividing up the Middle East according to their plan. What kind of sense is this going to make?
Yeah, I mean, does Iran ever say anything about the King David Hotel bombing, which was done by Israelis against the British, or some of those terrorist groups in the 40s? I mean,
over 90 people, I think.
I would say it goes back to 1917 or early. And this is the thing: you always, when in doubt, zoom out. I mean, there's always a bigger picture to look at. I mean, what's happening now did not start.
I like that.
But when in doubt, zoom out. But also, America is, what you might have heard of what's called the Ladine doctrine, and this is it's I think a guy named Michael Ladine, but this is a paraphrase. Every 10 years or so, the United States needs to pick up some small, crappy little country and throw it against the wall just to show the world that we mean business. I mean, this has
Disgusting.
become it's not a means to an end. It is the end. That's the whole thing. War is not the goal is not peace. It's just perpetual war
Yeah.
until somebody's gone, I guess. And I'm afraid that's how I don't think there's going to be an end to what's happening in the Middle East until somebody's down to zero. Yeah, unfortunately.
Well, and I guess France gave Israel the technological means to create nuclear weapons. So maybe they supplied the enriched uranium, highly enriched. But yeah, they've got nukes and they have like an Armageddon sort of perspective about this. Like it doesn't pencil out. Even Netanyahu's military quote leaders are taking issue with the fact that he doesn't really have an end game here. What the fuck? If there's no diplomacy at some point, what are we going to do now?
Yeah,
And how many others are we going to drag into this? Hezbollah, they're chomping at the bit. Like they've practiced amazing restraint about what's going on, but they're still like blowing up shit across their border into Israel. But where are the borders too? Like Israel apparently doesn't have any defined borders in many respects. So there's this like unspoken idea, and sometimes it's spoken about from the river to the sea. From the Likud party's point of view, it's even more expanded than what the Palestinians mean by that, right? But the protesters are basically saying, from the river to the sea, we need to have freedom for people, at least from like a liberal democracy point of
yeah,
view. So having a state or maybe two states, however they fashion it, but having equal rights for everybody. But of course, this is the classical liberal notions, like from John Locke and the founding fathers. That's where people get these ideas of a liberal democracy, right? But what does that devolve into? Eventually, it's like pressure group warfare, special interests,
yeah,
corrupt politicians to the max. I mean, pretty much all of Congress is bought and paid for by APEC, the American
yeah.
Israeli
Public
Public
Affairs Committee.
Affairs
Yeah, yeah.
Committee.
They're bought and paid for by lots of people. I mean, yeah,
Hundreds of millions of dollars, right, is exchanging hands here
yeah. And
to
there's
keep the Zionist agenda intact and keep this perpetual conflict going. Like it's insane, really is insane when you zoom out and look at it all. It's like people need to wake the fuck up and realize that they're in systems of domination that aren't designed for human health and well-being and peace and justice. Like if we had a free market that respected property rights, it would be amazing to see entrepreneurs come to the fore to meet human needs, the need for choice, the need for respect, the need for justice, the
yeah,
need for freedom and independence. All these needs would be met in a free marketplace. But
if
that
we
that vision is not within the bowels of the Defense Department or the State Department or the Pentagon. Like they're operating on completely different agendas that are not in line with American interests, not in line with human
yeah,
flourishing, basically. They are anti-humanity at the end of the
well,
day. They are responsible for putting us on the brink of Armageddon, essentially. As we're talking right now, there are thousands of nuclear warheads, thermonuclear warheads. These are hydrogen bombs
yeah,
ready to launch, ready to launch, right? And if it weren't for the decisions of two different Soviet officers, look at the balloons that just came up.
yeah,
They just put up the peace sign and did some balloons. But yeah, Stanislav Petrov and Vasily Arkhipov. These were two different occasions where they had a chance to launch nuclear weapons in response to what the US military was doing, and they chose not to do it. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be here talking. That was in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Vasily Arkhipov was down in a submarine, and this is cataloged and told in various books. But Daniel Ellsberg wrote a book called The Doomsday Machine: Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner,
yeah,
and he told the story about how they're down in there in a sub that the U.S. Navy didn't think was nuclear, or didn't think they had a nuclear atomic bomb on it. Essentially, these were not thermonuclear weapons. These were like what they dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but they were probably at least 15 kiloton, maybe 20. I don't know what the actual size of those was, but it could have blown up the Navy fleet above them because the Navy was dropping mock depth charges on them, trying to get them to surface. But they had lost power, I believe, on the sub, or air conditioning. Like it was 130 degrees in there, and they're all just roasting. They're like, let's just launch this nuke, this nuclear armed torpedo that we have, and take out the U.S. Navy. Like we're cut off from Moscow. We can't hear anything. And they're trying to kill us. And Vasily, they needed a decision of 3 Soviet officers. And he was the one that said, no, they just want us to surface. Let's just surface. and the rest is history. So,
Yeah.
there were other instances too, and accidents happen all the time, right? And when you've got the least responsible organization on the planet, the US government, in charge of this, you know, all of
Yeah.
us are in jeopardy, essentially.
Yeah.
So that's the hard facts that we need to deal with.
It's it's the most powerful and the least accountable organization in the world. I mean, really, ideally, that's the president of the United States is the most powerful and the least accountable person in the world, in the history of the world, really. I mean,
But don't forget,
yeah,
the rhetoric is, the propaganda is, leader of the free world.
yeah, it's this is what gets me. Yeah, yeah, that's
Talk
what
about
gets me.
Orwellian. That's just like
Yeah,
newspeak, right?
and one thing I think we should acknowledge. I'd want to acknowledge. Israel is doing terrible things, but a lot of the countries that are around Israel are real unlivable shitholes. And
The ones that
you've got
Israel has peace treaties with, like Egypt.
well, I mean, you've got Sharia law, you've got public beheadings, you've got.
Well, I think in Egypt, especially, I
I mean,
think the
none of
female
these.
genital mutilation is like
Yeah,
95%.
yeah.
It's the
I mean,
highest
yeah.
anywhere.
I mean, I can't think of any country. Maybe northern Cyprus I might live in, but I certainly would never want to consider living in Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Lebanon,
Hmm.
Turkey, Egypt, Sudan, Libya, Tunisia.
Yeah, I think I watched the interview with a
I might
doctor.
consider living in Oman.
Yeah, a doctor from Tunisia was interviewed, and he had to leave the country, death threats and all that. So lots of dictatorship madness going on in those countries. And the Arab Spring was supposed to
Yeah,
let these liberal democracy flowers bloom, but that didn't last very long. And you've got military coups and military dictatorships and all that stuff. So yeah, there needs to be an enlightenment in the
yeah,
philosophy in those areas, obviously.
yeah,
But that does not take away from the fact that the US
yeah,
military and
yeah,
US government is in charge of the genocide,
yeah. I'm
overseeing it in Israel, right?
yeah,
If they were doing a genocide in Egypt or wherever else, it's still important to oppose
yeah.
that in principle.
I'm not I didn't say I was favoring it, Wes.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think about Sharia, though, the Islamic law? I was trying to find out, are there any elements of that in any country that sync up pretty well with, right to free speech, free press, due process, redress for grievances, all those Bill of Rights sort of things that we hold uh, as sacred here in America. At least we're taught in grade school to do that, no matter how much they're eroded and like the Second Amendment is being violated, all those kinds of things. But I don't think there's any place that's practicing Sharia that upholds the spirit of the Bill of Rights, as far as I
I
know.
don't think any of them do. I mean, sometimes from what I hear asking around, maybe the best Muslim country to live in is Malaysia. Uh,
Mm,
well,
perhaps
I know
not
Andrew.
Indonesia.
Yeah, Andrew Henderson really likes Malaysia. You know, the guy who does that Nomad Capitalist channel.
Okay, yeah. Is he in
He's
Kuala
having his
Lumpur?
conference. Yeah, he's having his conference in Kuala Lumpur again. So
Okay.
obviously he likes it. Your story about Dubai
Oh
doesn't really
yeah.
surprise me. And after hearing that, Dubai is sometimes held up as this pinnacle of civilization. I said, no, it isn't. You know, uh,
Well, it's got a
you
lot of
know,
money, right? It's got a
well,
lot of
well, that- yeah.
shininess to
Well,
it.
this is the thing. Yeah, this is what's so scary about the situation. We have stupid animals who have a lot of fancy gadgets and dangerous weapons.
What could
You know,
possibly go wrong?
yeah, yeah. What could possibly go wrong?
And the worst organizations on the planet running the show, essentially, like communist organizations running the show for everybody, in
Yeah,
charge of the infrastructure, in charge of everything that people do with their property. Like, this is insanity.
yeah,
This is
and
like
they're
an archaic system. On my show, I did a series on integral theory, Ken Wilber's
yeah,
views, and this idea of a teal organizational structure. This is the next stage in our evolution if we can get there without self-destructing, right?
yeah.
Because what we've had for thousands of years is amber stage. He's got these
Yeah,
various stages to hallmark or to
yeah,
show what we've been involved in. These are pyramidal style top down organizations. So the person at the top is the decider, as George Bush
yeah,
would say,
yeah,
right? And this is not sustainable. This is not respectful of all the people involved in society, right? It is ruling over people because they can, because they can
Yeah.
get away with it through all the propaganda and all the governmental schooling. Like what percentage of the population didn't go through the governmental schooling process? My friend Brett did a long show for 12 years, the School Sucks Project,
Yeah.
pointing out all the contradictions of this and
Yeah.
all the
Yeah.
unintended and intended side effects and consequences of this, right?
Yeah. It does bring up the fundamental question though, is why is it that when Homo sapiens get together and they form groups and organize, that almost always the scum gets into the positions of power,
Because
whether
there's
whether it be
those
some
positions
club
of
or
power are
whatever,
there to be occupied.
or even sometimes allegedly anti-authoritarian organizations. It happens.
Yeah, like power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And of course, government is absolute power, at least to some extent. That there is a check with the population. As long as you've got an informed populace, you have a chance. And even as Ayn Rand said, as long as there's still freedom of speech, freedom of press, and due process, you have a chance. But once you get rid of those, you don't have a chance. You don't have a chance
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
Either you fight to the death or get the hell out of there. You
Yeah.
know.
So, getting back to the topic where we were, really, I think we can all agree that the objectivist movement was substantially changed after those fateful events on Tuesday morning, 11 September 2001.
Mm,
Uh, the
yeah.
tone the tone definitely changed. I mean, I remember being in e-groups. I saw people saying "nuke Mecca" and just
Yeah, and how many of those people were Israelis, grew up in Israel? That's the
not
question
very
for
many.
me
I
because
had Israelis, but it was suddenly interesting how it was you were no longer able to criticize Israel in objectivist circles.
yeah,
I compared Israel in the 90s to what Americans did to the indigenous people here, and nobody said a word to me about it, and nobody said, nowadays. And of course, it's immediate, and and of course, you're never just accused of opposing Israel's policies. You're
mhm.
always, you're always accused of other things. You know,
Yeah,
playing
like what instead of
playing
what would they say?
playing the card. You can't just, even though there are plenty of Jews who don't like Israel either. I mean, in fact, some of the most Orthodox Jews are totally opposed to Israel. They say no.
Exactly, like Rabbi Shapiro,
Yes, I
actually.
had Rabbi Shapiro on my show once.
Oh,
Rabbi
excellent.
Yoav Shapiro. Yeah, he was
Yeah,
great.
he has a really coherent view on this. Like, do not equate Judaism with Zionism.
Yeah.
Many of the Nazis were in favor of Zionism, by the way.
Yes, some of them
Right?
were.
There was collaboration going on.
Well, that
So,
was
as
yeah,
Max Blumenthal,
yeah,
another Jewish person, says, Israel is an anti-Semitic project, essentially.
yeah,
So it's designed for its own self-destruction.
yeah,
Unfortunately, I mean, there are lots and lots of people in Israel that probably want peace. I mean, lots in the sense of thousands, because 98% agreed with the bombardment of Gaza, right, as a way to achieve some sort of safety. Like, it's not going to happen. But that idea, the feeling of vengeance is what was really championed there. Let's just destroy it all
vengeance. Yes. Well, I,
rather than justice, right? I would guess many of the people that committed those atrocities on October 7th were actually killed. They were destroyed by Hellfire missiles out of Apache helicopters, as Israelis did. They had this, what is the doctrine that they have?
the
That they
doctor.
basically say, we won't allow any hostages to be taken in to Gaza, or initially it was with the military. Do not allow any military soldiers to be taken hostage. So you just lay waste on the group that has them hostage, including the hostages.
Yeah.
There's a name for this. I forget the name actually. But they killed a lot of people that were being taken hostage back into Gaza, essentially, that were in those cars. That's why there was all that fire damage to them. And a clear understanding of what actually happened on October 7th has not been really addressed. And you could go back to 2001, 9/11, right?
Yeah.
Was there an objective investigation of that? I don't think so.
I don't think there was either. They didn't even they didn't even find the black boxes, and my guess is they didn't really look for them.
Hmm.
They found the cockpit voice recorders and all that stuff, the black boxes.
And then all that led up to that, all the intel that they had and so forth. So it was
I
another one of those
Yeah.
convenient attacks for the US military
Well,
to do this mass expenditure of weaponry and just line their pockets as they
I'm
go
not
overseas to bomb people that we don't even know, essentially.
I'm not an architect. I'm not an engineer, so I haven't really went down the rabbit hole of whether or not the World Trade Center was made to happen on purpose. But I definitely believe that there is evidence that it was allowed to happen on purpose.
Yeah, I think I'm in favor of that one. They let
Yeah.
it happen, essentially. I don't think
Uh,
there's much evidence at all for a
the
controlled demolition of these things,
I
given the nature of how it all went down. You would have to somehow forecast that enough damage was done to those buildings to make it seemingly plausible to demolish them with explosives, right? So especially like Building 7, like it encountered a lot of structural damage and fires prior to
Yeah,
this notion of being demolished. But it,
yeah,
I did an assessment of this. I went through the research for a few weeks and I debated with some folks about it just online, trying to get to the root of it. I actually talked to Richard Gage. He came to San Diego,
yeah,
architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, and this notion that no steel frame building has ever collapsed due to fire um, was contradicted by these happening. And that's because they had different architectural designs than a typical box ladder frame design, apparently, for steel buildings. This was
yeah,
like an exoskeleton that they built with these long trusses spanning out from the center cores. So yeah, different design, and it couldn't handle the fire and damage that
yeah,
happened to them. But that doesn't address what led up to this happening and why it happened, right?
yeah,
And why, the Saudis, apparently this elite family was flown back to Saudi Arabia like the day after or something.
yeah.
And a
Well,
lot of blind eyes were turned to the nature of the Wahhabism, right? This very
mhm,
jihadist form of terrorism.
yeah,
But again, that's an outgrowth of the US military occupations in these various countries, right? And the atrocities that they've committed. So it's really, really tragic that the American public is asleep at the wheel. Not even at the wheel, they're in the back seat. Maybe they're
I
tied up in the trunk of the car at this point. And the neocons are behind the wheel, and the objectivists are sitting side saddle with them saying, go faster,
yeah,
go faster. Like I wrote
I
an article, my one and only article for Strike the Root back in the day. Just sent you the link. It's called Objectivist Goose Stepping. And Elon Giorno back in the day was giving talks. He gave this talk at the Ayn Rand Institute in UC Irvine. That's where they had their place up there. They gave talks at, and I'd go up to various ones. And he was just making this case that we need to just really go, really full on out neocon the neocons in terms of this hawkishness in foreign policy and just become basic warmongers to destroy all the terrorists that we can find, and even the ones that are related to those, right? It's all collateral damage. And they found Ayn Rand making statements about um, there are no innocents in these war situations. You're just fighting for your life, essentially.
yeah,
But that's her collectivism.
yeah,
She
yeah,
grew up in the Soviet Union, so she didn't ferret out those contradictions about collectivism, and then it becomes genocidal at some point.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It does take on that note. And I was getting back to 9/11. I also point to the shorting of the stocks before the World Trade Center happened, and also the reality that some people who were supposed to be there weren't there, like Sarah Ferguson, the former Duchess of York, and I think the mayor of San Francisco was supposed to fly, but he didn't fly, and things like that. There were definitely some things that make that look funny. But as you pointed out, Wes, this is a tough thing for me about innocence in war, because I often bash a lot of the Russians because of what's happening right now. But do you think Americans, I mean just Americans in general, are innocent in all these wars?
Well, the ones on the battlefield? or the
I,
one
I mean, I mean,
civilians.
I mean the fact that the
Civilians.
fact that the United States of America went in and attacked Afghanistan. Do you think the American people are innocent? I definitely do not think they are innocent. They went
Well,
out and they gave George Bush more votes in 2004 than 2000. That tells me that they are at least partially guilty.
you could say that the people that voted for those warmongers and the perpetrators of those wars are complicit. They're directly related to it, right? Because without their votes, that wouldn't have happened. But this whole voting system,
Yeah,
there's various phrases in libertarian circles. No matter who you vote for, government always wins.
yeah,
And don't vote; it just encourages the bastards.
yeah,
And it's an advanced auction on stolen goods or stolen loot. I think Mencken's phrase.
yeah.
So all these things play into it. And if you claim to have the most free republic in the world, yeah, it would seem that the people that are contributing to that republic that leads to the warmongering are responsible. They need to be held accountable too. Now, how do you ferret them out?
Yeah.
How do you find them amidst all the people? Because you've got Lysander Spooner used to mention this idea of not knowing who a person is voting for, like having the privacy to vote in the ballot booth, right? This allows people to get away with, pillaging their fellow citizens
Yes.
and not being held accountable for it.
Exactly. Yeah. I really, yeah. So I really wonder how often, how innocent are the citizens of a country when when a country with all the things that America does, how innocent are Americans? I mean, we've both been involved with a movement that has been around for a long time, and we've for example, we certainly warned Americans that someday they would have economic catastrophe coming, and if they had listened to us, that we could have prevented that economic catastrophe, but they've completely ignored those warnings. So it's
Yeah, it's a system of its own design in
yeah,
a sense, because you take any like hood ornament off the car that's going off the cliff and it's not going to contribute much
yeah,
change, right? So the system itself needs a major
yeah,
overhaul to the point of dismantling it. Like we need to transcend the system and go into the other organizational system, which I called Teal, which is Ken Wilber's
yeah,
perspective on this. This is the second tier of thinking where you've got self-management, wholeness, and evolutionary purpose rather than hierarchies. You might have natural hierarchies based on skills and abilities and so forth. That just naturally happens, right? But coercive hierarchies are gotten rid of. So as Frederick Laloux talked about in his book, Reinventing Organizations, he doesn't get explicit about the political side of things, but he says what we want to do is bring the best of the free market into organizations so that you don't have these. I mean, look at the incestual relationships between the people in the corporate world, the boards of directors and the CEOs of these companies, and the Pentagon and the Defense Department and all these places, the Treasury Department, like all these places, it's a revolving door of Wall Street casino stuff and the military industrial congressional complex and K Street, essentially. Like this is what happens when you create an organization that is a coercive monopoly that is inherently unaccountable. And everybody thinks the rhetoric, the propaganda is this is for our freedom and our safety and our security. Government is tasked with this idea of protecting us and providing for us, right? At all costs, apparently, at the destruction of the value of our currency. Like when a coercive monopoly is in charge of the currency, which by the way, objectivists do not favor, but they hardly ever talk about that when they champion using the US military to go bomb the terrorists to smithereens and kill countless innocents, right? They don't ever get back to the first principle to say, listen, once a government is in charge of the money supply, all bets are off, essentially. They've got their own money printer, and they're destroying the lifeblood of society, which is the value of the US dollar at this point. It's lost 100% of its value practically from, the advent of the Federal Reserve over 100 years ago. So here we are, right? We need a free market money system. And then
yeah.
you've got the rise of Bitcoin and all these cryptocurrencies that could supplant that. It's just that the scaling thing is an issue, right? Because this is the least efficient way to do a database. We've got a public
Yeah.
ledger that is cataloging all the transactions that are being done. But there could be some ways to do it, and it's definitely preferable, using whatever cryptos are out there that are
Yeah.
usable, using those instead of the US dollar. But
Start.
of course, the US has a stranglehold on the nature of the on-ramps and off-ramps into crypto, right? They're trying to prevent the demise of the US dollar as the world's currency, essentially.
I don't want to go into crypto right now, but so, we've got this, I'm reminded of this article from Justin Raimondo, who of course is gone now, but the objectivist death cult, and just Peikoff is sorely disappointed. This was in 2004. Peikoff is sorely disappointed by this war. His preferred target, Iran, is not yet in America's crosshairs. He'd rather, that seems to be what they really want to, is they want to go to work against Iran, but whoever does this terrorism and just this whole thing, and there's never this attitude, well, they're over here because we're over there. We're just supposed to act like all this happened. I mean, all of the, America was perceived pretty positively in the Middle East before all this, and that, of course, and
so it became the world's policeman, supposedly.
Before, and not to mention, we also have to at least go into the overthrowing of Mossadegh in Iran in 1953. That was another huge event.
Lots of nefarious activity, for sure. As long as you've got the CIA in charge of this shit, and the NSA and all these organizations that are just corrupt to the core and anti-freedom, all bets are off again. Like, we can't really see what the landscape of the Arab world would be like, or the Persian world in Iran would be like, in the absence of these organizations that are in charge and dictating things and getting all kinds of conflicts riled up. I think most people in Iran loved American culture. Like Thaddeus Russell has this notion that American culture, popular culture, the music, the entertainment, all the arts and so forth, and the fashion, all that is what is going to free these countries ultimately. But it's up against the nature of the governmental regimes that have a stranglehold on people, their minds, basically. Everybody's been propagandized. And I think maybe that you could say that the North Koreans and the Chinese are the most propagandized. However, what's been going on the world stage lately by the Zionist agenda, this is the ultimate in gaslighting and propaganda, essentially.
I would say North Korea is very, very propagandized. Also, from what I hear, Turkmenistan is almost as bad as North Korea too. So, although it doesn't get as much attention, but
all the Stan countries, they've been brutalized by all kinds of.
There's different degrees of how good and bad they are, but I know North Korea and Turkmenistan are these are countries that you can only visit if you go on a tour group. So, and
a friend of mine went skiing just like last month in Kazakhstan. So apparently there's spring skiing over there.
Well, that's a different country,
And then she stopped in Dubai and spent some days there, and I informed her about the nature of that. And by the way, you referenced what happened. I didn't mention what happened. Well, we almost got deported upon arrival at 1 a.m.
Yes.
My friend and I arrived. We were going to spend the weekend there before we went to Istanbul to meet up with another friend of ours. And we were just exhausted. It was like a 9-hour flight from Manila. And there were like 3 or 4 screaming toddlers on the plane, and the parents weren't helping matters, and they were just allowed to scream forever. So no one could get any sleep. We get off the plane and we end up in this open area. There was a sign that says, "Go this way if you're new here to get processed." And then the security guard said, "No, go this way." And my friend just rolled his eyes and he said, "Fuck." And it was not very loud. We were the only people there, just me, him, and the security guard. And he said, "You want to go to Dubai? You will not go to Dubai." And he walked up to me. "Do you want to go to Dubai? You will not go to Dubai. Follow me." So we followed him to the police station in the airport. And my friend, at this point, he realized, he said a bad word, right? He said a profane word in public. And even though no one else besides that security guard was there to hear it, right? And this is our greeting. This is the way governments work. This is the welcoming committee at every airport for everybody. I really feel for the people that come to the U.S. and the first people they meet are the TSA, right? And then the customs enforcement. Right. This is insanity. Anyway, we get to the police station, and they had him sign a document that was in Arabic, and there was no way he could translate it. And he signed it. He apologized profusely for
he has no idea
profanity, but he had no idea what he signed. And so he was like on pins and needles the whole weekend, saying, "We got to get the fuck out of here," or "We got to get the bleep out of here."
I would have just, I don't know what your options were, but I would have just said, "Well, we'll leave. When's the next flight out of here?"
Yeah, I was afraid they were going to send us back on another 9-hour journey to Manila. And I
You would
know
have
when they deport people like that,
you would have
too.
gotten out of there at least, though. I don't know what they do. I did work with a guy. Literally, he overstayed his visa, and I think it was Argentina, but uh, they arrested him, and he was on a plane the next day. You know,
Yeah, well, I
yeah,
mean, it was 1 in the morning. It could have been like the
yeah,
late shift,
yeah.
and this guy just
You're
had an
tired.
attitude.
Yeah,
He had like
I
some kind of
yeah,
Napoleonic syndrome. Like
I
if you give people power, ultimate power like that, they
yeah,
will tend to take advantage of it.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it turns into like a Stanford prison experiment. But Dubai is a mix of all kinds of interesting things, right? You've got people walking around in burqas, being led by men. And then you've got these giant buildings, like the Burj Khalifa is there. It's the biggest building in the world. Although I think some other Arabic countries trying to top it. I can't remember how that's going, but it's ginormous. And then you've got some really interesting architectures and all kinds of amazing, feats of engineering and science, uh, juxtaposed to this ancient religious stuff. And a lot of the traditional things are still there as well. So, like, if my friend Troy would have been female and we'd not been married, we couldn't have gotten a room together. So they've got that going on. Not much of a liberal sort of perspective on things, although they're trying to cater to people that are more liberal in that way, so that women that are not from there can go to the beach in a bikini, whereas the locals, I don't think, can. So there's all those kinds of things going on.
Well, it's often, they all want to pretend that they're civilized. Anyway, so we've now, gotten up to 2004, and it seems like things have really
24. Yeah.
2004, but it seems like things have really gotten worse ever since the last 6 months. I don't know. What worries me now is I think now that objectivism has been putting out this spew for 20 years. I don't know. I don't know if the movement can ever be salvaged. I mean, and now we see people like, uh, and when I see what's happening to the libertarian movement right now, that's almost completely severed its connections to Ayn Rand.
Mm.
I don't
What do you
know if
suppose that
that's
is?
yeah, yeah, and I suppose that's largely because just because it's went nuts like this. I
Perhaps.
Objectivism never, even in the 90s, objectivism did not have that good a reputation among libertarians, but it's
Was
clearly
it
gotten
was it
worse.
mostly their pro-war stance, or was it their like staunch
Their
sort of
cultish
separate?
behavior was part of it, but now I think the pro-war stance has taken over. I mean, you
Yeah,
see
I think it
people
was
like
like back in the day when David Kelly and Leonard Peacock had that spat, right? Values, fact and value, I think was the issue where David Kelly
that
had the
was
audacity to go give a talk to some libertarians.
laissez-faire books. That was in 1991. That was a very interesting time. I mean, that was really, but David Kelly's the Atlas Society has very rarely stepped into the whole Israeli business. I think they realize just how divisive the issue is, so they've just completely avoided it.
Mm,
The Atlas Society Asks is one show that almost every time I listen to it, it's like, boy, I need to get that person on my show. They always have a really, really good person to talk about various issues, but they've avoided Israel just because I think they also maybe realize that they want to be the one alternative to, because really, I mean, the crowd, like Yaron Brook and uh, Elan Jorno and Tal Safani or whatever his name is,
he's the new director. Yeah.
they're pretty bad. But I got to tell you, Craig Biddle is almost as bad or worse.
Hmm.
He's now with the Objective Standard Institute, which seems to have went its own way. I think that's largely maybe because of a guy named Carl Barney, and he just every once one thing I'm realizing every once in a while, a new organization will crop up, but it also happens at the same time that there just happens to be one person who's throwing a lot of money at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
If you look at like APAC, they've
well,
thrown a lot of money at a lot of people, and people
I don't, yeah, but
hand over
I'm talking
checks.
about the organization though, not, I mean, who
Yeah,
funds
I
it?
wonder who is funding it. Have they ever
I suppose
accepted
I,
Zionist funds? I
I
imagine they
have,
have.
I could look this up, but I suppose APAC probably has a lot of sugar daddies, but I could be wrong.
For
But I
sure.
mean, I mean, back in the 90s, the big spender for for David Kelly's group was Ed Snyder, who was
Hmm.
also the owner of the Philadelphia Flyers, which I always thought was kind of funny. Well, if you pay any attention to sports, uh, especially in the '70s, the Flyers got this reputation for being the Broad Street bullies. Like they were the hockey team that always fought with everybody and were always being violent. So it's kind of funny that the owner of that hockey team would be funding objectivism. It seems
Yeah,
rather
expansive
ironic. Yeah, they
rationality,
called them
right?
they called them the Broad Street bullies, and just hitting, but
Makes for great entertainment, right?
yeah,
That's
but
like
Ed
the
Snyder, yeah,
fascination with ultimate fighting these
yeah,
days.
yeah, I
Grown
think
men giving each other brutal beatings.
yeah. So I think and I don't know if Ed Snyder's still around or not either. But and some of these organizations eventually do take on a life of their own. But Wes, it's funny, but I'm starting to really question whether nonprofit organizations are really that effective at all.
Yeah, well, the wording of that nonprofit
Yeah,
is kind of a red flag, right? Because what's going on there? Why was this structure set up to begin with? And of course, a lot of attorneys are responsible
yeah,
for these things, right? And it's like, again, when you've got a legal structure that's set up by the status matrix, you really don't have a coherent understanding of what one's purpose is in relation to all of these interventions and restrictions and regulations and perverse incentives, essentially. What kind of incentives are set up in a quote nonprofit? That's a good question. I was working with a nonprofit in San Diego that was doing counseling for adolescents, and that one guy, I remember they came in and they ended up arresting the guy that was in charge of it because he was embezzling funds, right? So there's this constant monitoring of these nonprofits to see if they're actually nonprofit and where the funds are going and all that stuff. It's like this is all within the legal matrix of governmental systems, right?
yeah, yeah. That's true.
I don't think you would even have this
Well,
legal notion of a nonprofit in a free society.
well,
You might have, like a reputation that you
yeah,
use these funds in these ways based on this purpose, and you have an open book and people can look at it, right?
yeah.
So that would provide reputation in the marketplace.
You wouldn't. Well, the whole reason for going 501(c)(3) is so you can have tax deductible contributions. It
There
seems
you
like
go. What kind
not
of
not. It
perverse
seems like
incentive is that?
nonprofit organizations are just a way for rich people to, like, they're just expensive toys for rich people to play with. Uh,
Yeah, and you look at the idea of a tax deduction, right?
yeah,
Imagine how much the marketplace is skewed because of funneling funds into tax deductions instead of actually what people would really want to do with their money.
yes, I mean, so because Snyder also put money into the Ayn Rand Institute, but then after the split with Kelly, he started funding Kelly and he funded other things. So
I see.
uh, there's a few other, and he was also involved with the Spectrum and the Arena. So he was involved with a lot of sports stuff. Looks like he might have been involved with Comcast as well. Snyder died in 2016, so that was something I should have looked up.
Mm.
So that's where we are now. I don't
Well,
know.
there is a lot of rigidity. I think that's an important thing to address within the objectivist communities, less with Kelly's group, and I'm not sure how they are now, but I noticed that they were at least tolerant of other views and exploring other ideas, and that sort of free marketplace of ideas is really important
Yeah,
to evolve the applications of your principles, because I think the objectivist principles are solid, like irrefutable. We live in an objective reality. The laws of identity and causality are irrefutable, essentially, and the law of non-contradiction, of course, is irrefutable, right? These all come from Aristotle over 2,300 years ago, right? And that segues into, you know, things are what they are. A is A is not non-A. And so having a clear understanding of the nature of objective reality is very important. There's two alternatives, existence and non-existence. So that sort of transcends all the magical thinking that we have in our culture about, you know, the afterlife, mind-body dualism, all that stuff. But it segues into epistemology, which is about reason and concept formation. These are very clearly articulated in the objectivist literature. Ayn Rand's book, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, goes into detail about this. a concept is a mental integration of two or more units according to their distinguishing characteristics, united by a specific definition. Like having a clear understanding of what our words mean and defining our terms is really important. And so it's really tragic that it goes off the rails when you get to the political branch. But then before that, we're in ethics. So metaphysics, epistemology, ethics. So an ethics of rational self-interest is something that pretty much no other philosophy in the mainstream has ever advocated, right? It's all some variant of self-sacrifice. And then you've got, the metaphysical magical thinking that leads to, intrinsicism, and this idea that, knowledge is imparted through faith, right? Which is belief in something without proof or evidence. You can modify the definition of faith to make it more sensible. However, like trust, I have faith in something because of the either intuition I have from all these experiences, or just what I know about the dynamic and operation. But that non-sacrificial ethics is really key to human transformation. And there's a bridge to be built there from philosophy to psychology. And that's where I talk about Marshall Rosenberg and his nonviolent communication methodology, which is extraordinary. And it's really transformative. If people really learn that, became fluent in nonviolent communication, that is essentially a non-sacrificial ethics, that we don't sit on our needs. We have all these different needs: psychological needs, physical needs, emotional needs, spiritual needs. All these needs can be met without sacrifice. So that's what objectivism promotes as well, a non-sacrificial ethics. So values and virtues that are in service to our lives and well-being. And from there, the next principle is about non-aggression. And politics is about how we interrelate, how we interact with each other in society. So, because if you live by yourself on a deserted island, you really don't need the non-aggression principle, other than, valuing yourself, right? Like the act of suicide is inherently self-sacrificial, unless it's to stop, ongoing pain that cannot be stopped, right? Or ongoing suffering, right? Because life is not about suffering. Life ought to be about happiness. As Ayn Rand said, happiness is our highest moral purpose. So it's just when we get into politics that things go off the rails because of this root of collectivism that they have not uprooted. They've not gotten rid of the idea that, kind of we're our brother's keeper, that government is in charge of protecting us and defending individual rights. So that collectivism tends to rigidify the entire spectrum of objectivist thinking to the point where they don't really go into psychology much. I've branched out into that on my show, talking about interpersonal neurobiology, which is a term by Dan Siegel from the Mindstein Institute. I've gone through to a few conferences of his, but he's all about how do we have well-regulated limbic systems. So we're not in the realm of rigidity, and we're not in the realm of chaos. Those are the two extremes. And in the middle is this, what he calls BRE. It's this acronym: balance, resilience, insight, and empathy. And if you've got that, then you've got a whole bunch of other things that you can really, use to integrate things: curiosity, calmness, clarity, confidence, compassion. All these things can lend to the integration of a bunch of ideas that are really helpful. And so the objectivism hasn't really gone in that direction. It's rigid in defending the principles of Ayn Rand according to her interpretations, right? And not ferreting out the contradictions, seeing government as a necessary good rather than an unnecessary evil, if you will, because it is a hierarchical pyramid-style organization. I don't care how you configure it, whether it's laissez-faire capitalism where everyone voluntarily funds it, but you can't fund anything else, right? And what happens when government itself violates your rights? Can you use a third party? Apparently not, according to objectivists, right? Or any of these other ways of interpreting the philosophy. I think as far as like the youth go, like we were at this talk about free speech on campuses, and it consisted of most people in their 20s, I think. I think we were the older gentlemen in the room. And yet a lot of these younger folks, budding objectivists, had this rigidity about the way they're seeing things and not stepping out of that and being able to be a critical thinker about the application of these principles. Say, wait a minute, do we believe in collectivism? Right? Like that meme. Wait, are we the baddies? I think that was either the British or the Germans. The meme, realizing that you need to really step back and take a look at the big picture, right? What was your phrase again? Stop and step back, or
Check your premises. Okay.
yeah, but you
So
said something that was really useful earlier. We could record it or rewind the tape here, but you said like span out and look at the nature of the
when in
context.
doubt, zoom out.
When in doubt, zoom out. Exactly. It's a
Yeah,
wonderful phrase. So that's one thing objectivists don't do a lot of the time.
I got that from a guy who trades crypto for a living. He always says when in doubt, zoom out. So it said, so if you're looking at the charts for a few days, zoom out and look at the charts for a few years. It's said, yes,
Of course, looking at the charts is kind of like driving a car
yeah,
while looking in the rearview mirror,
yeah,
trying to predict the future, right?
yeah. So that's he has a name. Yeah, yeah. That's a crypto guy. Yeah,
Didn't they do a
so,
study where they had chimpanzees,
yeah.
basically choose stocks, and they did as effectively as the best stockbrokers.
That's easy to believe. Yeah. So that's where we are. I don't know if there's anything else we can really comment on with the objectivist war. I'm wondering, especially after the coronavirus stuff, if a lot of occupants of Earth have a desire for what I call righteous violence.
Mm,
They don't necessarily want to be violent, but they want to have a righteous cause that will. It's almost as if violence is this type of virtue signal. Hey, look at me! I'm beating up the bad guy. It's a
yeah,
and that makes me good.
yeah, like a moral righteousness. I would guess a lot of people that commit acts of violence, maybe everybody thinks that they're in the right
Yeah,
because it's such an extreme form of human behavior, right? It's kind of the nadir. It's the opposite of what an objectivist ethics would advise, unless you're using tactics of self-defense. Everyone
yeah,
has the right to defend themselves, So it's when it scales up into the governmental system that things go off the rails and become
yeah.
basically massacres and mass atrocities and genocides.
Well,
So this idea of using violence to get peace, that's kind of
yeah,
the idea that the objectivists had. And I really appreciated in our talk with these student objectivists of
yeah,
sorts that you wanted to keep the peace, because I was making this point, like violence is not going to solve the problem
yeah,
here with this conflict, with what's going on between the terrorist regime of Israel and the terrorists in Gaza or wherever else they conjure up terrorists. And they doubled down. They said, no, violence will result in peace.
and I would say, it's the question of, would I be willing to fight in this war, and would I be willing to have this war in my neighborhood?
Mm,
Yeah, there. I mean, I watched those videos of some people I know in Tbilisi. I did a show, a few days ago. You know, maybe I would go over and fight for those people. I wouldn't want to bring that fight over to my neighborhood, but I'd be willing to go over there. I know another. I have a guy who used to be a friend, but he's a doctor. He's went over to Ukraine and he's went there to
yeah.
do medical care. It's
Mm.
at
For
at a
sure. Yeah.
risk
You
of
got to
his
have
own
the
life.
paramedics and
I have
paramedics. Yeah.
no. I am totally okay with that. I mean, in a way, libertarianism in some ways is about privatizing war. I mean, that's why, at the time of the founding fathers, we had a lot of privateers, and in some cases, the boundary between the privateer and the pirate wasn't very clear. You'd hire, so what? So the proper response to Bin Laden would have been to issue a letter of marque and just say, okay, you bring us Bin Laden, dead or alive, and we'll give you $100 million or something like that.
Hmm.
And the beauty of that system is you don't get paid unless you do the job. You know,
Yes. So that would be,
yeah,
that's market forces in operation.
yeah.
However, if we stop and what was the phrase again? Step
When in
back,
doubt, zoom out.
when in doubt, zoom out. If we zoom
Yeah,
out, we see
yeah.
that maybe Bin Laden was a creation of the U.S. military
Yes, he was.
and the State Department. How about that?
And something, Wes. This is why when I hear stories about CIA, funding various revolutions or whatever, and I know some people will say that, some of the people I know who are protesting over in Tbilisi might be taking funding from the CIA, and it's like, well, if I was one of those activists, I'd probably take the money too. And it's not like the CIA really watches you. They just hand out money like it's candy on Christmas Eve, and so just take the money and do whatever you want anyway.
Yeah.
Taking money doesn't necessarily mean that you're taking orders.
Yeah, or that you have to sell your soul.
Yeah, you
Like
can
that's the
sometimes.
ethics that we're living in today, where people sell their souls
Yeah,
for money, for the almighty dollar, which
but
leaves them empty shells of human beings at this point, not able to
yeah,
think and reason correctly, and not having any compassion for people suffering. Like it's crazy the amount of yeah, just really tragic, costly strategies that are being used
yeah,
to try to justify the unjustifiable, essentially.
yeah. But if
But
I'm in,
yeah, so the war thing, like what is the phrase? War is the health of the state,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So if we got rid of states,
sure.
you could get rid of the lion's share of wars
Yeah,
and the
you would get rid
potential
of a
for
lot.
wars,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, but sometimes, you end up with these family feuds. Getting rid of the state wouldn't have gotten rid of the Hatfields and McCoys. They would have still
Okay,
had.
so the Hatfields and McCoys
Yeah,
were like lesser sort
yeah,
of
yeah,
violent groups within the status matrix, right?
but
But if
it's
you get
still.
rid of the status
Yeah,
matrix, maybe that would send a message to everybody that we can
true.
actually live in peace. We can resolve our disagreements so that we can achieve agreement in some respects to achieve justice in our world. And I think that that is within our nature if we allow all individuals to sense and respond according to their own needs. And that's in line with that teal organizational model,
Yeah,
getting rid of the arbitrary coercive hierarchies so that we can sense and respond according to our values and our needs. And of course, there's all kinds of ideologies on the planet that are not conducive to getting needs met, right?
oh,
So,
yeah.
so those contradictions need to be ferreted out, and a lot of psychological work needs to be done for people to realize that various belief systems can be counterproductive to our own flourishing. And when they're traumatized in childhood and fed a bunch of lies about their particular belief system, that is like this process, just like deschooling. You get out of the schooling matrix and you need to free your mind from all of the dogma, right? So equally that needs to happen for people's belief systems so that they can use rationality to the utmost and the law of non-contradiction, like apply that across the board. Are there any contradictions in my philosophy? And let's look at the psychological side. What are the incentives for me to uphold dogma versus getting rid of it?
Yeah, but, one thing I've also found out sometimes, especially the wars between these little countries, they're not that much different from family feuds. It's like, well,
Yeah, who's in charge?
his grandfather killed my grandfather, so I have to kill him. That kind of thing. It's uh,
Yeah, what is it? Oceania has always been at war with East Asia,
well,
or
yeah.
vice versa. That's 1984.
Well, it's interesting though to see how there's been finally seems to be peace among Ireland and England, and but I still hear various things. And again, having visited Armenia, I know I certainly saw a little. We were in a section where we did see some military around, and we realized we actually got pretty close to the border with Azerbaijan, but we were in the northern part, and more of the fighting was in the south.
Mm.
So that was good to know. But
And what do you think the grievances are on each side? I think it's important to look at the grievances.
uh, sometimes I think it's just the grievances that the boundaries aren't always drawn accurately, and you have people come in drawing boundaries and they're not accurate. And some cases, the governments, both of them, they're kind of oppressive, but you'd rather be
Mm.
oppressed by somebody who speaks your language than somebody who doesn't speak your language.
Yeah, it kind of boils down to those simplistic
You know,
notions. But then property rights is a big deal too, because
yeah,
governments are notorious for violating property rights.
yeah, true. And the thing is, though, most boundaries between countries aren't always black and white. You might have a city that speaks one language here, and then you have a city that speaks one language over there.
Hmm.
And so there's kind of an area where the boundaries are really, where it's kind of a mix on both sides.
Yeah.
It's not always a perfect, drawn line. I'd probably have to go look at it, but there are definitely some grievances there. I hope they can find peace, but and capitalism certainly would help them find peace. But this,
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure. Like an integration of
yeah,
concepts um,
yeah,
that are conducive to human rights.
yeah.
I'm
One
thinking of a
thing,
book by this guy who's actually a sheriff down in Arizona.
Mac,
No, David
Sheriff Mac.
Hathaway. David Hathaway.
Okay,
I'm sure they
David.
know each other, but David's on the border down there. So he actually was in the belly of the beast. He was working in the DEA, right, down on the border, essentially. But then he came across these freedom concepts, right? The libertarian literature. I'm not sure which book he happened upon first, but he went down that rabbit hole and he completely freed his mind and life from it. But of course, he's a sheriff now, but he doesn't actually walk around with a gun on his hip. He
Santa
doesn't want
Cruz
to
County
pretend that he
Sheriff.
has
Okay.
more authority. Yeah, he's a county sheriff, but he wrote a book, amazing book called
Oh, he's in Nogales. Yeah.
Immigration, Individual versus National Borders. And I think that's the key. Scott Horton wrote a blurb about it. This book is a must read for anyone who has scratched their head when hearing, quote, libertarians and Austrian economists espousing national borders to keep people from pursuing voluntary interaction with each other across these artificially imposed dividing lines. Do libertarians really want government and this most violent, destructive, lawless, and abusive government to bar peaceful people from traveling or from trading with others? So he's pointing out, he has another blurb by Will Grigg, who said, the
Yes.
means we employ are the needs in the making, and the issue of immigration and border policy is not an exception to that principle. In this
Yeah.
conscientious, respectful, and carefully reasoned essay, Hathaway offers a critical examination of what has been called the, quote, realistic libertarian perspective on immigration, namely
Yes.
that state enforced restrictions on immigration are compatible with the non aggression principle and property rights. If the end we seek is an individualistic society liberated from state licensed violence, state centered means cannot get us there.
Isn't it amazing how, there, one thing I notice about the immigration debates is always interesting is you have these people who might live in Kansas or Wyoming or Kentucky or wherever, and they're always screaming and shouting like they're experts on this issue. But
Yeah,
then you have a point of view that's different from somebody who's 10 miles from the border. Who who knows more about this? It's like why should these people who live 1,000 miles from a border be telling people who are 10 miles away from the border how to live?
yeah.
It's
And Hathaway, by the way, speaks Spanish fluently, and I think he's married to a Mexican
yeah,
woman, and they've had 9 children who he's unschooling. They're unschooling them.
good for him. Yeah, I
Yeah,
need. Yeah, he sounds like somebody I ought to have on here. Yeah,
I think that'd be great. Yeah,
Arizona,
he's an excellent guest.
Arizona,
He comes on Free Talk Live
Arizona
sometimes.
politics does have a unique flavor to it. Whether it be very Goldwater or other things. Uh,
Hmm.
I'm definitely learning that. So, yeah, these people, I haven't had enough people talk about immigration, but I'm glad you pointed him out. I had not heard of him, but now I need to know about him and being a sheriff.
Yeah, of
A lot of sheriffs are not fond of the feds either. They hate the
course
feds.
not. No, no, he knows the nature. He's schooled in the
Yeah,
Austrian School of Economics, so he understands
yeah.
the nature of that corrupt system and wants to get rid of it. He's an abolitionist like
That is
himself
that
in the
is one of the
voluntary.
that's one thing that's unique to a lot of the English common law areas. You have the sheriff, you have an elected cop, and he has to respond to they usually have a different point of view on a lot of these things.
Yeah, and they actually have authorization to
Yeah.
prevent the influx of federal officers, I guess.
They can deputize
The
people. There's
line
lots of
from
things.
the big DC
Yeah.
matrix.
Yeah, I wanted to getting back to the whole thing about, I think one problem now is though, especially America is living in a victim culture where victimization is becoming the currency. So you now try to say, "Hey, I'm the victim," and therefore, when you once scream out and say, "Hey, I'm the victim," now anything goes. So you can
Yeah, and
tell
we
that
see
person
that in bold
racist.
relief with Zionism.
You can fight back. You can fight back with something against them, even though because you're the victim. So whether it be
Hmm.
your feelings are hurt, or I feel uncomfortable, or I feel safe, and I think this has actually creeped into objectivism. Uh, I don't know if you're aware of what they call the victim triangle, where you have the victim, the perpetrator, and the rescuer.
Hmm.
And I've noticed sometimes a lot of people want to be the rescuers, and that's another form of virtue signaling. Hey, I rescued the victim from this oppressor. And
Hmm.
sometimes there isn't even a story, a story about the victim may not even remember this. I had a case, where I was getting into discussion. She said, "Well, 5 people signed affidavits, and granted, this was actually the case, about a woman sexually harassing a man. And I contacted the man and said, "Hey, did so and so sexually harass you?" He said, "No." So either he forgot it, but it was almost like the alleged crime was more important to the rescuers than it was to the victim.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? And you could see the US government as the rescuer for the supposed victims
Well,
as Israel.
I'm referring more to groups like the ADL, the Southern Poverty Law Center, these
Mm.
groups who go out and try to police everybody's words, everybody's language.
Yeah, overt violations of free speech.
Certainly, I don't know if you've noticed it, but certainly, white knights are a lot worse than any female feminists out there.
Mm.
And I would
Yeah.
also say the same thing about these so-called anti-racist whites. They're a lot worse than any African Americans I know.
Yeah, there is a disturbing sort of parallel there with racism. Like once you get involved in the pits of racism
Yeah,
and you are anti-racism, now you're looking for any semblance of racism out there and maybe even
yeah,
conjuring ones to keep that dynamic going rather than saying, we need to get rid of these non-essentials in distinguishing
yeah,
human beings, seeing each person as an individual. And that's one thing that Ayn Rand championed. The smallest minority in the world is the individual,
yeah. And
right?
I think also one clear tenet of a libertarian society is that you are innocent until you're proven guilty. So you need to have evidence. So just throwing out accusations that are false or being reckless with your if you're reckless with accusations, I think you're and and granted, we're not
Mhm.
always. I think we all have moments in our lives where we are reckless with accusations because we want to believe something negative about somebody, but recklessness with accusations is not a libertarian thing. You should be clear. You should be clear about your accusations and make sure that there actually was a crime committed or an offense committed before you go and say, "Hey, you
True.
offended."
Yet we live in a in
Yeah,
a in a society in which who controls the legal system? What is the legal system? It's a coercive
yeah,
monopoly. Once again,
yeah.
it's the
Well,
least accountable, most rights violating institution in charge of everybody's semblance of justice, right?
well,
So
yeah.
that's the spanning out and taking a look at what the hell's going on here. Why is there so little justice happening? Why are
Well,
accusations being, elevated above the due process of
I I
rights
I would
violations?
also go and say that critical theory probably invaded law schools before it invaded a lot of other schools. So now
Maybe.
you have a victim. You have now a system that is geared more toward glorifying the victim than protecting the innocent, which is how it works. And this is where I come up also with what I call the seems to be the objectivism to woke pipeline,
Mm,
because wokeness is about throwing out accusations recklessly, and especially seems to be something that affects some women that either have been objectivists or maybe still call themselves objectivists.
hmm.
There was an
Interesting.
article I brought this article up here. It was in New York Magazine back on March 25th,
Mhm.
and it was Andrew Huberman's Mechanism of Control. And Huberman runs that podcast where he talks about self-improvement and stuff. And
Yeah.
so Carrie Howley, who comes up with this business about it and starts you know and I could sum
Getting
it up
into his
as
personal life and his personal
yeah
ethics. Yeah.
I could sum it up as women fall for a man because he's a player, and then they find out that he's a player and they complain about him being a player.
Mhm.
So, oh, he's a player. Oh, well, I like this guy because he's had sex with lots of women. I said, oh, wait, this guy has sex with lots of women. It's like,
Yeah, so it gets back to self-responsibility, and what you're kind of indicating there is that there's not much self-responsibility being taken upon the people that are playing the victim role a lot of the time, and that's really tragic. I mean, we live in a punishment paradigm, though, and so yeah, it's just a mess. Like I went to a talk last night. A
yeah,
couple of Spurneys were telling the protesters, this is off campus, but they gave a talk about what happens when you get arrested and you go to jail. What's this process look like? Okay, so these are defense attorneys, right?
Yeah.
So they're in the status matrix, they're members of the bar, and they're beholden to the status matrix, and yet they're they're noticing all the things that we libertarians can notice, right? They say, this is one of the slides, a few opening thoughts on the criminal legal system. There is no justice in it. It exists to manage and legitimize the application of violence in service of the existing relations of power in society, i.e. governmental power. It alternates between mind-numbing banality and shocking brutality. Both are integral features. The structure and functioning of it is meant to mystify, confuse, isolate, and wear you down. And that speaks to the legalese and all the symbols and, you know, wearing the robe and being up on a higher pedestal. Like, it's just, it's very religious, you know, and it's by design, basically. The structure and functioning of it is meant to mystify, confuse, isolate, and wear you down. And then the final one, no one gets out unscathed. Even the biggest victories exact a price. And that relates to Mark Stevens always saying, yeah, when you're sitting in the courtroom, you've already lost, essentially. Like Adventures in Legal Land, I think that was his primary book, but he wrote another one called Government Indicted. I think this is his latest one. So he spent a lot of time in the trenches in the legal system and realized the utter insanity of it all, like not meeting human needs for justice, let alone like restitution and reparations for victims, and, you know, restorative justice, which would allow the communities to get back to a peaceful place, right? But this good guy, bad guy, this criminal mindset that government fosters throughout society, because, you know, Rand Paul had that little plaque on his desk in Congress, right, or in his office in Congress, said, "Don't steal. The government hates competition." You see, so when you get the biggest criminal on the block that's in charge of things, expect petty criminality to happen. Expect
Yep.
people to go off the rails and have dysregulated limbic systems and engage in punishment and vengeance and all that insanity. And then you throw a layer of legality on top of that with all the attorneys, right, that have been
Yes.
trained to be members of this course of monopoly. It is
Yeah.
just so far from justice and any kind of freedom concepts.
Here's that article, the Huberman article about the Carrie Howley, who and now what's interesting about Carrie Howley is she used to go to objectivist seminars that were run by David Kelly's group back in the 90s. So
Didn't know this.
and now she's out here. Basically, her shtick now is just writing a gossip column about a guy who's about Andrew Huberman's sexcapade
Yeah, a lot of gossip
and how
columns.
these women have been victimized by it. And there's also here's a really entertaining article I found from Carrie Halley, though. You remember this? You remember this incident that happened? Well, it's been 9 years ago, but remember Cecil the lion?
Mm.
Remember
Hmm.
when some guy
Yeah.
went to Africa
Was it a
and,
dentist or
and
a doctor
shot
that went over
Cecil
there?
the lion? And of course,
Yeah, yeah.
people on the left were all up in arms because this lion was shot. This is a
Yes.
lion. You know, lions actually do kill people,
Yeah,
but for
that is
some
the saying
reason,
from the ancient Greeks, go, there can
because
be no pact
yes,
between lions and men.
but for some reason we were supposed to be sad. And it's like what we learned when we mourned Cecil. This was in her article about Huberman was in New York Magazine. This was in the New Yorker, which
Hmm.
which usually has some sensible stuff. And she then goes on, down here where this is just about changing the system, about how we have, just people who shoot lions for fun. It's a display of, masculinity, and points out that lions are the only cats that socialize. And it's just like,
Yeah.
why is this important? It's,
I
just
guess she watched
Cecil
too
the
many
lion.
episodes of The Lion King or something.
I don't know. It's why that ever, that's one of those things I just ask myself, why does this get any attention at all? Some American goes to Africa and shoots a lion, and suddenly it's all over the place. It's like, what in the world is,
Yeah, I remember reading a book back when,
we've had it,
Queen, called
you know,
Death in the Long Grass. I think it was
you know,
Peter Hathaway Chapstick. He was talking about his safari adventures.
well, also the Lion King, but also, remember, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe too. The main hero is, a lion. So it's,
True. Aslan, right?
yeah,
That
Aslan,
one?
and remember that, yeah, they like, I think cartoons, because they put so many, But Carrie Howley has now gone off on all this left, and we can read her. She is on Wikipedia here, and of course, she apparently wrote a nonfiction novel called Thrown Out. I don't know what is a nonfiction novel. I've never. I mean, novels are fiction, I thought, but anyway, it's a
seems oxymoronic.
She wrote a few articles like so. Oh, also, she had an article on how did Larry Nassar deceive so many for so long. Yeah.
So is she relating any of this to objectivist principles that you can see?
It looks like to me she's completely gotten away from objectivism. Now, I will say one thing. She's doing looks like she's doing something about Reality Winner, which is certainly something I can get behind. Reality Winner, her name is actually Reality Winner. She was a whistleblower. So, but here's a case of somebody who went, and she was at Reason Magazine for a while. So, you can kind of see how she might have been at least somewhat on the objectivism side. Now what's significant is we'll go from Carrie Howley to a man who I believe back in the 90s was her boyfriend. I'm not sure if they're still together or not, but and as far as I know, both these people are still single and childless. Will Wilkinson. Will was very prominent among Randist discussion groups back in the 90s, and he was at Cato, and now he's gone completely woke. It's like, and there's this article, I'll show it here, why I'm not a bleeding heart libertarian. Well, and of course,
what's the essence of that one? What's the takeaway?
Well, that he ever was a bleeding heart libertarian kind of makes you wonder right there. Bleeding heart libertarians are some of these, they're kind of like the woke libertarians, but
that's from a blog that somebody started, right? Back in the day.
And notice also it starts out when it says Matt Z. That's a reference to Matt Zolensky or something like that. He's definitely one of those anti-woke libertarians who suddenly was also, and it's funny how all of these people ended up on the wrong side of the coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, that was a tragedy. Yeah, so I'm no libertarian. It's but
so yeah, when did you get involved in libertarian stuff?
Well, I got involved in libertarian stuff, I guess, from '94 when I was at the Foundation for Economic Education.
Okay, and then you stumbled upon the objectivist stuff.
Yeah, that was when I went to a seminar at the Foundation for Economic Education. That's where I learned about the Institute for Objectivist Studies. So, I would just, according to Will, quote, anyway, I would encourage other decreasingly standard libertarianish types to hasten their passage through the limited bleeding heart stage and just come out as liberals, or better yet, to come out as inscrutably idiosyncratic. You are not alone. Well, if you're inscrutably idiosyncratic, you are. Unquote.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny the way these things go. It's
objectivism is criticized for being too individualistic, I guess.
Yes.
Right? Or egoistic, or some would conflate it with egotistic, and selfishness. Selfishness is seen still in our culture as antithetical to interpersonal harmony, right? That's why Rand wrote my book, The Virtue of Selfishness.
Yeah.
And I title it that just to evoke a response from you, to really get you to think about what the nature of this self-sacrifice meme entails, right? Because if you're not supposed to be self-interested, then you're interested in somebody else's self more than your own. But is that person interested in their self at all? Or are they supposed to be interested in yourself? And how do they have interest in a self that isn't theirs? How do they attune to those needs, essentially? So again, it gets back to Marshall Rosenberg saying we need to be self-full, not full of ourselves in the sense of bullshit, but understanding that our life matters. And that's what Ayn Rand would say too, that your life matters. Each individual life matters. Not the collective, not the tribe, not the group. To some extent they can if they're comprised of individuals, thinking persons that can differentiate fact from fiction and injustice from justice. So that idea of being individualistic has been taken to ridiculous places in the status matrix, with the casino called Wall Street and all the corporate heads that, say Peter Thiel, for instance, who, I don't know, was it explicit fan of Ayn Rand, but I think he's.
I don't know. I don't know if Peter Thiel's ever been, that's another thing we could get into. They're what I call these Ayn Rand masturbators. It's like, they get all excited about Ayn Rand. They get really excited, but then they don't do anything. And certainly Mark Cuban is one of those. I would certainly call Greenspan one of those. Paul Ryan one of those. I think they do cause more harm than good because they don't really seem to make much effort to live this stuff.
Yeah, well, Peter Thiel, I mean, head of Palantir and some
Yeah,
other
well,
espionage
I
tools.
don't know if
Has
Peter
always
Thiel
been.
has ever read Ayn Rand or not. I
I don't
said
know, but
Mark
he's
Cuban.
looked at as this icon of like individualism, right? And the capitalism
Yes,
camp essentially. So because objectivism advocates for capitalism, which just basically means free markets,
yes,
trade between private owners. But in this day and age, it means crony capitalism in the eyes of liberals mostly, right? So they're seeing all the problems with the corporate system, and the corporate system is an outgrowth of government itself. Like if it weren't for legions of attorneys formulating these organizations and all the tax incentives and disincentives and the regulatory structures and all that and regulatory capture that happens with various oligopolies like in the telecom
yes,
industry, like all
yeah,
that nonsense is the result of this governmental regime, this coercive monopoly that divvies
yes,
out, like rewards their friends and punishes their enemies. It depends on how much you lobby and how much money you pay, you can get your just desserts from this
yes,
organization.
yeah,
So
yeah.
this is what's called capitalism, even though it's really not. It's
Yes,
basically
yeah,
fascism.
yeah. We're well aware of that. I think this is something that Rand failed to understand, although the problem has got worse. And I just said, for every
Yeah,
Henry Reardon, there are 100 Orrin Boyles. And I really
exactly.
believe that anymore. Maybe it wasn't that way 50 years ago. It might have
Well,
been
it
more
was
like,
in the making, I guess. The
but, yeah,
structure
but
was already
nowadays
there.
even if they win when the rules are fair, once they win, they want to fix the rules.
Mhm.
Watching the corruption of Silicon Valley and all that stuff has just been eye opening and very, very frightening, really, because I've also noticed there's definitely a culture of false accusations among objectivists.
Hmm.
Uh, because I've seen it happen, because I've witnessed it personally. So that's
Sure.
something that you definitely, making out. Uh, I sometimes say that the drama in the Libertarian Party is high school, but the drama in the Objectivist movement is grade school. Uh, it's that
Yeah,
bad because
I've
it's
only been like tangential to them after a serious disagreement about government itself, and they just
yeah,
double down on that stuff because of the indoctrination that they get.
yeah,
That is the one true way to freedom is by
yeah,
having a coercive monopoly of rights protection, which achieves the opposite essentially, and all history shows the opposite. So I'm not sure if there's much of a future beyond the basic principles for objectivism. Definitely not in these movements that have been, you
yes,
know, trying to get books like The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged into government schools, right? That seems to have not put a check on the nature of the fascist regime that we live under now, right? So, what is the point of having an objectivist movement if you're not willing
yeah,
to ferret out the contradictions in the applications of your own principles? This is serious. This is a
yeah,
serious
yeah.
problem.
Well, I think also objectivism is now. Sometimes you don't necessarily control who your audience is, and it
Hmm.
seems, but maybe you can, but sometimes you have people that show up that you don't necessarily expect, and I think I've been long wondering why are certain people attracted to Ayn Rand and why are some of them not, and it seems like to me the reasons that I thought, and I've also noticed differences of people who first read The Fountainhead, first read We the Living. I know one person who first read Atlas Shrugged.
Hmm.
People who started with the essays. It seems like to me there's a lot of people who are just getting caught up in this, but they don't maybe know why. But then they're not. And as far as false accusations are concerned, this is one of the few times I'm going to mention her on this show because I happen to know people who are close to her personally. But let's take a look at this lady, the woman who accused Johnny Depp of doing some things that were not so.
Amber Heard?
Yes, Amber Heard has definitely been an Ayn Rand fan. It's
Oh,
been
I didn't
said
know this.
back in around 2006, and I have to admit, based on my experience with other women in objectivism, it doesn't shock me that something like this happened.
Hmm. Did she ever mention it, objectivism explicitly, like in her process of
It's
accusing?
been mentioned in several articles about her. Specifically, it
Okay.
came up on the Rebirth of Reason board. But we also know the Johnny Depp situation and the accusations against Johnny Depp, which don't really shock me, considering there's a I think there's a lot of narcissism rooted in the victimization attitude that I'm a victim when you're not really a victim, or and also when you have that kind of narcissism, you naturally come back, well, okay, it's okay to lie because I can figure out a way to get out of this.
Yeah.
And one thing I'll say for most women who get attracted to Ayn Rand, most of them are pretty damn smart. They're not, so they're a little more calculating in, how they might lie about something. Uh,
Mhm. Well, there's an appeal to intelligence
yeah,
with Ayn Rand's works, right?
yeah.
She wanted to
Oh,
strip away the
yes.
non-essentials and look at
Yeah,
how are you conceiving of reality? How are you conceiving of yourself? What do you think is an ethical approach to life,
yeah,
essentially? Why do we need ethics?
yeah,
This whole idea of
yeah.
philosophy who needs it. That's one of her anthologies. And those are all really important, crucial things for human beings to figure
Yes.
out. So so she's a trendsetter in all those ways that
Yeah,
matter in that regard. It's just that her applications of some of these things and the vestiges of collectivism that she drug along with the philosophy are not helpful. And they're
yeah.
actually destructive and perhaps self-destructive.
Well, there were mistakes there too, but I think Rand was just trying to make sense of what she saw in her own life, with the nationalization of her father's pharmacy and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Uh,
The death of her parents under Stalin's regime.
yeah, well, she didn't. Well, she was gone by then. It
Yeah.
really, it's really it's, uh, some of the people I've met some people who came from very abusive situations, and I think objectivism did them a lot of good. It helped them get through that. But then I think you also
Mhm.
have this other class of objectivists who probably had everything given to them, and this almost gave them a sense of self-righteousness about it, like they were entitled to it, and somehow they didn't, and they seemed to think everybody lived like they did, and they were. I mean, I remember going to the seminars and just seeing how nonchalantly people would throw food away, and I guess having been raised in a
Mm.
having been having it was kind of told us in a Catholic school, even though we were rich, it said that it was a sin to throw food away because
Yeah.
look at all the other people around the world who don't have food. Eat the
Yeah.
food you have and be grateful for what you have instead of just being cavalier about it. And
Well, that's kind of like this cliche about capitalism,
yeah,
right? Like we just don't give a fuck and we'll just produce
yeah,
more and there's like no reasonable understanding of
yeah,
what the environmental impact of these six systems are on humanity. Like right now, as we speak, we have microplastics, nanoplastics in our bloodstreams.
yes,
We've got forever chemicals in our bloodstreams, thanks to the industrial chemists
true,
at
yeah.
places like Dow and DuPont, right? That were given a blank
Well,
check by the
yeah,
government, essentially. So this
true,
could be a deal breaker for our species and the ecosystems.
yeah.
Right? We
But
just
it
don't
also
know.
but it also goes back to the issue of this whole cavalier attitude. Well, we don't need farmers; we can just buy food at the grocery store. Uh, you know, it, I think it's important to have this belief that you're always going to have abundance, but also it also understands that you're always going to you only have abundance based on putting the effort in to create that abundance. It
Yeah,
doesn't make any sense. You don't do it otherwise.
and it needs to be
Yeah.
premised on
I
free
mean,
market system. And that's one thing they tend to gloss over when they start talking about the modern economy that we have today. They're overlooking giant elephants in the room to
yeah,
promote a free market, but we're so far from that at this
yeah.
point.
I don't know what the profile of the standard objectivist of the teenager who gets involved with objectivism, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's somebody who probably came from a somewhat comfortable upbringing and then just went from there. I wonder how many really poor kids get into it, or how many real. I suspect there's more rich kids than poor kids, and not to
Probably
mention,
the case.
yeah,
Although a lot of people have read Atlas Shrugged and it didn't even really phase them. Like apparently Hillary Clinton read Atlas Shrugged.
yeah, I know, and she was a Goldwater girl in 1964. I don't know what, and
Yeah.
I've got to say it too, Wes. And what I find troubling more and more is I think there's a lot more grift out there than I initially thought.
Mm.
I think people will change their beliefs on a dime just because they're getting paid to change their beliefs. I didn't
Or at
want to
least
think
their
that.
interpretations of the principles. I guess
Yeah,
that's pretty common as well. Like if you think that you believe in these principles and yet you're doing the opposite
yeah,
or you're espousing the opposite, like how integrated are those principles really?
that could be as well. But it's fun. It's just it's been, yeah. But watching these, so I don't know where that comes from. But maybe you let the person come in and you just let them start. You give them an inch and they try to take a mile, or you let somebody who donates money to you give a little bit, then they start giving a lot, and then suddenly you don't want that money to disappear, so you worry about, well, I don't want to say anything that offends my big donors. And I think that's what happens with now. Yeah, it's interesting that I think the most successful organization in the history of objectivism was the Nathaniel Branden Institute, and it was a for-profit organization that
Yeah.
sold classes and sold books to people. It
Hmm.
wasn't based on donors, and I really wonder if Ayn Rand had not went crazy and just shut down. I think if Rand and Brandon had come out and told the truth about what happened,
Hmm. Come
there
clean with all of it and
probably would have
done
been a little bit.
seminars about how things can go off the rails,
Yeah,
even for the high priest of
yeah,
objectivism.
yeah. If you'd let me finish a little bit, I think if they'd come, they might have lost 10 or 20%, but I think they would have kept going, and I think they might have changed the world. I really do.
It had a lot of
Yeah,
momentum,
and
you know?
yeah, you have that momentum, and I mean, I know R.W. Bradford, when I was out at Liberty, he said they were selling more issues in their magazine than we ever sold, and they were sticking to their principles, and the fact that it was funded by the mass and funded by subscriptions, I think it really
Mhm.
was working. I don't know.
It's kind of a grassroots
It
organization
would
now.
have probably split off, and there probably would have been various offshoots, but I think it really could have made a difference, and instead now it's just mired in this corruption that I don't know how it's ever going to get out of it. Uh,
Yeah.
one thing that the one possible savior is that uh, if somehow the copyrights could get freed, I think
Mm.
that would save things.
Yeah, because they are staunch advocates of intellectual
Yeah.
property, right?
Well,
Which
this
is
is one of
another
the
contradiction.
problems. This is one of the big problems, though. When you put everything behind a paywall and everything, you can't find Ayn Rand's writings hardly anywhere for free on the net because of this.
Well, I encourage
This
everyone
means,
to the Ayn Rand lexicon.
yes,
That
I
is
understand why,
yeah.
but what this means now is that anybody and everybody else who is free can lie about her, they can misquote her, and there is no repercussion for it. Uh, what the best thing I can say about the Ludwig von Mises Institute is that all of Rothbard's stuff is out there. A lot of
Yeah.
other things are out there, and they
Free
also
PDF.
realize they also realize that by putting the stuff out there for free, it does lead to other sales elsewhere. So they
Mhm.
actually realize that putting Rothbard's stuff out for free does actually make them money.
It makes sense, doesn't it?
So the Ayn Rand Institute has never figured that out,
No.
and I don't know. And let me. This is not legal advice. This is not tax advice. This is not immigration advice. This is not financial advice. And I guess this is not copyright advice. So, but putting it out there would really, I think, help Ayn Rand immensely. Because people would get back, or if somebody just started an organization that
Yeah.
I think David Kelly's Atlas Society is doing the best right now, but you can forget ARI, although ARI still has the money behind them. OSI still has the money behind them. I don't know I'd have to look and see what their budgets are, but David Kelly on the whole has been a pretty good ambassador for objectivism. He's a good speaker, I
And
think.
it stands to reason because it's the most
Yeah.
free,
Yeah.
ideologically free of a lot of those restraints
They
and allowing
they try to talk to
dialogue.
people, and they actually
Mhm.
they actually seem to like people. That
Good.
helps.
There you go.
Uh,
Yeah. People that aren't necessarily in the in group, right?
yeah.
That's the thing. This ethnocentric
You know,
stuff really needs to be
yeah.
dispensed with.
One thing you talked about, things being open. I will say one thing about groups like ARI. They're still very professional.
This is
I
true.
mean, if I make, I had if I made a 5 o'clock appointment to meet with somebody who worked at the Ayn Rand Institute, I feel pretty confident that they would show up on time for that meeting.
Mhm.
I go to other places in the libertarian movement, and I would not expect them to show up on time.
Yeah, and that speaks to that explicit
You know,
personal ethic
yeah,
that
I
values, the
yeah,
values and virtues, reason, purpose,
yeah.
self-esteem, rationality, productiveness, and pride, justice, and that's part of the justice
Keeping your
component,
word and
right?
commitment, and sometimes I get among these anarchists, and I remember, just this. I remember going to Anarcho Polko, and people, and I said to people, it was the most disorganized clusterfuck I've ever been to,
Mm.
and I said it was and I don't think that was unfair to call it a disorganized and it's
You were just, like, calling it as you saw it, essentially, and they're probably like, there's a degree of admiration for that level of
well,
chaotic stuff, right? Because there's what's called an unconference where each person that shows up can give a presentation about whatever, and they
yeah,
design their own the schedule, how it's going to go down and stuff. And that can be a bit chaotic, but as long as you got this sort of bottom up sort of purpose of what we're trying to achieve here, that helps things. It doesn't help things when people are drunk and they've got ethical systems that are kind of off the
yeah.
rails, not really meeting needs in that regard interpersonally.
And this is one thing I think objectivists really hate. Anarcho Polko is the most, I put this in a signal group, was also the most disorganized event I've ever attended. The most troubling aspect is that a lot of people see disorganization as some kind of virtue. And I got this stupid response. Quote, the most disorganized event? You went to the Salulita super spreader. No? Sometimes you just have to go with the flow. Mexico is built different. As to
Mm.
anarchists, we were the kids in school who got in trouble for not following arbitrary rules, for marching to the beat of our own drums. You can't expect arbitrary organization from such people. Sometimes the best experiences, the most interesting conversations, the chance encounters occurs while man's plans are failing.
Mm.
And I wrote back, unquote, and yes, in my experience with many libertarians and anarchists, I have few expectations. If one of them says, I will call you at 3 o'clock, I do not expect to call at 3 o'clock. I solve this problem by referring to deal with people who are actually dependable and honest. I mean, seriously, that, that's, and believe me, that kind of shit makes you not want to work with people. You don't want to work with people who don't show up on time, who don't meet deadlines. It's just like,
Yeah, like there were
and you
some
don't get
truths.
anything done.
There were some truths in what they replied or what they said, but they didn't
Yeah.
address the grievance that you had about just lack of timeliness and
Yeah, well, the thing I was complaining about was the fact that they put out a schedule and then didn't follow it.
yeah, yeah, and if they
Things
prefaced it
started
by
late.
saying, by the way, the schedule is subject to change at any time," then at
Yeah.
least you'd have been informed about it, right? There'd be informed consent. So those
Well,
are
yeah,
important values.
and one time they actually, and yeah, and I think there was one time yeah, there's a lot of things you gotta yeah, usually they put down schedule is subject to change, is to cover their ass on speakers.
Yeah, I mean, it
This
can be
is
hit and
something
miss
yeah.
at the airports and travel and all that stuff. So
Well,
yeah,
yeah,
I hand it to anybody that can,
yeah.
put on a
The thing is
conference. And I've not been to
yeah,
Anarchapulco. I've had friends that have
oh,
gone,
yeah,
but there was something that went on after Anarchapulco. I forget what the name of that was. To
Anarcho
meet
Forco.
Anarchoforco, yeah.
Yes, and
Lily, I think, sent me a message about that, maybe doing something there. But that was like right about the time that that one man was killed.
I don't want to go into all the details of what, but I did one
Yeah.
show with Avi Esther about it, who was working a lot behind the scenes at one of the conferences, and she talked about volunteers being unreliable, and there's always been this there's a lot of excuse making among libertarians, and I worked on a science fiction convention called Marcon that was in Columbus, Ohio, and they had people working on that thing for 10 and 20 years, and they did it because they like it. But when I go to these other events, these libertarian events, and I said, "Well, what's your staff stability like?" This is well, we're volunteers. So I said, "So what?" So they said, "Well, yeah, well, we're always turning over." I said, "Well, I worked on this sci-fi convention. It was all volunteers, and they stuck with it. That's because I guess because they actually liked working together and they actually cared about what they were working about."
So they had a united purpose kind of thing.
Yes, yes, the whole point. Yes, the whole point. Yeah, that's the whole point. The libertarian excuse is we can't keep volunteers on our conference because they're volunteers, but non-libertarians are able to do this. Why is that?
Mhm.
I mean, I can
Yeah, that's kind of an organizational oversight, I would say.
Yeah, well, the point is, if you have people actually care, they're going to stick around and they're going to be committed to the mission of doing it. They're there
Mm.
because they want to be there. But if you're, but you know, if you end up having people acting stupid and being stupid all the time, they're going to lose interest just because, you know, I've had volunteer experiences. I had one volunteer experience like that, you know, where
Yeah. Well, how about Freedom Fest, where they invited Donald Trump, right? That was a
I don't know
huge.
what I don't know what Freedom Fest has to do with anything here and inviting Donald Trump. We're talking about organizations where people work on the cons.
Yeah. Well, that is a big conference, if not one of the biggest libertarian conferences,
And
I think.
I think quite a few people on that conference are paid anyway, but I'm not sure how that works.
Hmm.
I've some conferences are easy to volunteer for, some conferences aren't.
I guess if they invite somebody with contrary views, such as Trump, with the explicit purpose of telling them how a stateless society is preferable, that would be useful.
Uh,
It'd
Again,
be interesting
I
to see
don't
the
know how it's
fireworks from that.
pertinent to what I'm discussing here,
Well, you're talking about the organization of conferences and how the
and how
libertarian community.
and volunteers that work conferences. I'm not talking about the speakers.
Okay. So, in your experience, have the speakers been pretty consistent on message, on point with the libertarian perspective of non-aggression? I would guess Anarcho-Poco is pretty well consistent with that, right?
Sometimes you bring speakers for different topics. The whole point is you
True.
bring something that might interest your people. I mean, I don't I have people on here that aren't necessarily libertarians. That's But again,
Yeah.
I'm talking about the work that goes into running the con itself. There's a lot of work that goes into running these cons. I'm not talking about speakers.
And in your experience with objectivist conferences, they've been like a cut above, essentially more professional, and
That
they
people do
honor.
seem to be more professional, yes.
Mhm.
And that there's this, yeah, that there's this boilerplate libertarian excuse that we don't have to be organized. It's yeah, there's a so
Yeah, that's not so helpful, and it can
yes,
be
if
frustrating for
yeah,
sure
yeah.
if you're trying to
You know,
move it
Anthony
around.
Johnson ran the 21 convention, and it was run really well too. He was, and that's actually one key feature right there. If the person who runs the conference and actually owns the conference is putting in a lot of work, I think
Mhm.
that trickles down. Uh,
True.
if that person at the top's working hard, I mean, Anarcho Pulko Berwick is hardly there. He doesn't care. He
Mm.
doesn't care. Yeah, he's the captain, and and as soon as the ship leaves port, he stays on the dock, and then he waits for the ship to come back. And
Yeah,
it
and he
shows.
allows it to, the marketplace to just figure it out, basically, even though there is explicit purpose about the conference itself. So,
I don't think he knows what his purpose is, but that is irrelevant now. Uh, anyway,
mm,
I certainly remember somebody else, you know, who went over to the. Uh, there's one other person I wanted to cover on the objectivism to woke pipeline. This woman, of course, was involved back in the '90s. Her name is Diana Brickle, and I specifically remember she was the person who first designed the website of the Institute for Objectivist Studies, which is now the Atlas Society, and
mm,
uh, so that's a. And she was also, of course, back then the girlfriend of Mr. Jimmy Wales. Of
okay.
course, he's now known as the
Founder of Wikipedia.
co-founder of Wikipedia. Yes, I had Larry Sanger on the episode a while ago. So
Hmm.
uh,
Yeah, I think Wales was in some objectivist circles back in the day, Southern
he went
California.
to those seminars. He was the founder of the Moderated Discussion of Objectivist Philosophy and a few other things. Yes,
Hmm.
yeah, had a very interesting life. He's a smart guy too. Regardless of your feelings, disagreements, or agreements with him, oh, Diana Brickle on Twitter on June 1st, 2020. Quote, earlier today, I was surrounded by hundreds of white people chanting and marching and speaking for the rights of black people. Never in my life have I dreamed that this might happen. Racism is too based in American culture, but it just happened in Breckenridge, Colorado. This was a very impromptu march and rally today. The whole protest was completely peaceful, as expected. Our local police, who have a good reputation, closed the streets for the march. They held a moment in silence. Yes, this is you can see Diana went all over to the woke left and June 2020, which of course the summer of love and Black Lives Matter.
Hmm.
Diana attacked quite a few people. She attacked the Brandons. She attacked Chris Matthew Scabara, which is something I cannot forgive. And
Yeah, that was a
Chris
guy I
Matthew
thought.
Scabara is truly one of the people who really is really shows a lot of the things that objectivism should be.
Yeah, that was one I thought that died. But actually, you mentioned Justin Raimondo. That's who it was. That's who I was
Yes.
mixing it up with.
Oh, quote, regarding COVID risk, I'm happy to say that almost everyone wore a mask, unquote. Yes.
Wait, happy
Oh,
to
that's
say?
wonderful.
Happy to say.
Everyone wore a mask at the rally, so she was totally bought into the quote science of COVID. It was,
Well, as I
oh,
used to say on Healthy
geez.
Mind Fit Body podcast, which I did for a number of years,
Yeah.
since 2009, actually, just a year after starting Complete Liberty. That was about health and fitness stuff, but I did a dive into the COVID madness. And I said, wearing a mask is a confession of medical ignorance. You don't know if you have it. You don't know if the other person has it. So why wasn't there ubiquitous testing for this
Yes.
stuff? I mean, if
I
government
think
was in charge of that, basically.
you know what was the dumb thing about all the mask wearing is I realized that while people were wearing masks, it was probably irrelevant in most cases because most people were not engaging in proper mask etiquette.
Yeah.
You wash your hands before you put it on, then you put it on, all that stuff.
Hmm.
And people, it was really just it was I don't know if my belief in this species will ever change again, will ever be the same again.
Well,
I
it's the trickle down effects of the domination system called government. Like if we got a sick system at the top in charge of everything, obviously it's going to impact the populations in all kinds of horrible ways, right? And people are going to look to those leaders like Anthony the Science Fauci to get their edicts from, right?
yes,
And then they're going to double down when the facts come out and reveal that he's been lying and doing things that they're the opposite of actually what's helpful, and then lining the pockets of all those corporate cronies. I mean, it's insanity, really. Like we need a wholesome set of systems that aren't these pyramidal style top down things, so that we have free markets, entrepreneurs meeting needs, seeing needs, meeting needs, so that we can transcend this paradigm of just following these supposed leaders.
well, that might be where we go from here. I don't know how. Uh, I definitely think that if the copyrights got out there, that would do more to decentralize objectivism. I think
Yeah, familiar with this.
people starting their own clubs and stuff like that, everything being self-funded. But
Have you
I'm also
interviewed Stefan Kinsella?
what?
Have you interviewed Stefan Kinsella?
No, I haven't interviewed Kinsella.
Oh, so he'd be a great interview. So he's over in Houston, and
I know
he's
where he
been
is.
staunchly a staunch advocate of getting rid of intellectual property as an objectivist. Essentially, he's a market anarchist objectivist. I don't know if he would call himself objectivist, but he does have those principles in mind. Like he understands the nature of metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and so forth. So he's been really showing people that it would be much, much better without these kind of constraints on people's property. Because really, ultimately, intellectual property is constraining what another person does with their property, their material property.
Yeah.
So ideas in the marketplace are things that, like the internet is the biggest copy machine, right? So it's
Yes,
really
it
hard to
is.
put constraints on people's activities when they see ideas and wanting to reconfigure those ideas and use them and so forth. So it's about like how you want to market your product. Do you want to market your product in a very closed-minded fashion or open-minded, saying we're going to create abundance here, and the more ideas, the better?
Yes, I know what you're saying. So, you know, I really, I think in some ways the internet maybe hasn't been as good for objectivism because it seems like to me it's made people more cowardly in some ways. People will say things to you on the internet that they'll never say to your face, and now it's gotten to a point where I think they're almost afraid to say things to your face. You know that
Mm.
it's funny that particular club that I went to. I didn't realize I'd gotten a message. I mean, who checks their messages on meetup.com? You hardly ever do. But they said,
Yeah,
"Oh,
it's a
sorry,
polarized
this meeting's,"
platform.
and then somebody said, "Hey, the meeting's only for students this week." I said, and I never saw that until I showed up for the meeting. But nobody said a word to me live and in person at the meeting. And if somebody said something to me, "Hey, we only wanted students this week, Chris," I said, Oh, okay. I didn't see that message. Have a good night. And then as I was leaving the meeting, I checked my message and I said to the organizer, I said, hey, I just saw this message now. I'm sorry. So I walked out and that was it, but
Hmm.
I mean, it's kind of funny when you, you uninvite somebody from the meeting via message, but you don't have but if they show up anyway, they don't say a word to you. So it's like,
Yeah,
okay,
that
you know,
lack of professionalism, like that's an example of
well,
not having.
Well, he didn't know any other way to contact me. He only knew me on Meetup and didn't know me anywhere else, so it's no big deal.
True.
I mean,
Yeah, but the
and
follow-up wasn't there.
they never have, that meetup is hardly ever filled up. I mean, they have 10 seats in the room, so it's
True.
if I'm taking it, it might make a difference if I'm taking a seat away from somebody else, but it's either me or an empty seat. But anyway, I don't think I'll head back there for a while, but it's there's no hard feeling. Everybody has their own thing, and if you've got a group and you want to have certain parameters as to who's in the group and who isn't, that's fine. It's
Yeah.
it's their group, so I do find it I think one thing there's actually becoming a lot of misandry in objectivism, which definitely is not something Rand would favor. I don't think it's unfair to call Rand a male supremacist.
Hmm. Yeah, she did make that statement, like she would never favor a female
Yeah.
president of the United States.
Well, the way her men are portrayed, the way the women are portrayed, it seems like there's always a case, where I want to worship a man and I'd like to worship a man. So it makes me wonder where these that you now have women who kind of are now misandrists in the movement. Not all of them, but some of them are, and I think the major elephant in the room here is that objectivism is. Uh, there was this little argument going on between one prominent person in the objectivist community and one more a libertarian, more oriented toward the Mises Institute. And I said, I said to the person oriented to the Mises Institute, well, you got to remember, objectivism is the philosophy of double income, no kids. He doesn't understand why you're busy. In other words, he has 2 kids and you don't. So he's got more time on his hands because he doesn't have 2 kids.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I was like, I could see why, because he said, you're ducking the debates. I said, no, I'm just busy. It's like, and that's kind of become a thing now. Sometimes a person is just busy. They're not ducking you in the debates.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, so I don't know how to explain that sort of sex difference in understanding this, like other than the psychological, right?
yeah, that's the one thing I've noticed though too. The best objectivists are what I would call the pro-family objectivists. I mean,
There you go. Because
Chris Matthew Scabara, while he is gay and never married, never had kids, he's always talking about his family. It's his family's all around in Brooklyn and everything,
and
you know,
Rand didn't really mention much
yeah,
about family. Like they should have a few portrayals in Galt's Gulch and Atlas Shrugged, but
yeah,
there was a lack of sort of discussion about family systems, and
kids
that's
are just not
another
there.
potentially domination system that they're raised in,
Yeah,
the
and
punishment paradigm and all the conditional sort of strategies that are used. I read a book called Unconditional Parenting, Moving from Rewards and Punishments to Love and Reason. And you would think
yes,
that would be championed by objectivists. Right? I do have a friend, Rosalind Ross, who wrote a book
yes,
called Objectivist Parenting. And
yes.
that might just be a video that she did. Maybe she did a book about that. But
Yeah,
anyway, that
Rosalind was on my show. I loved Rosalind. She was on my show.
awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
that was quite a while back. But yeah, Rosalind was amazing. Yeah, she was and Marcia Enright is and
Hmm.
her daughter is married with a child, having a child. She's pretty cool too. It's
Yeah, families is what make the world go round, right?
well,
Without having children, the species ends in one generation, right?
one thing you notice about Dagny and Dominique, they're always trading up.
Hmm.
Oh, I've got a really good boyfriend. Oh, wait, I got a better boyfriend now. It's like, and
Yeah,
eventually you get to that point where you have to stop trading up. It's
you could make an argument in the Fountainhead, right? Dominique traded down because um, she couldn't take the whole, uh, criticisms and hate towards Howard Rourke. right? So then she went to Gail Wynand for a
You
while.
could say that, yes. It was definitely an interesting how this thing works out there, where the women are always moving around. In some cases, Kira and We the Living is definitely has interesting relationships with her men too. She's very purposeful in them. It seems like they're almost like the men are commodities to her, and that the men don't really have feelings or anything.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Whereas in
it's
Atlas Shrugged with Dagny, she was seeing a sort of escalation of the values and the intelligence, I guess. I don't know, like
maybe
what.
so. But I look also at just how Rand got married, and for to avoid to for the partially at least for the purpose of avoiding being deported. So
Hmm.
it really makes me wonder where this all comes from. But I've gotten into I got into some red pill stuff to try to figure out some of this stuff, and it makes a lot more sense now. But uh,
Yeah, there are a lot
I
of
don't know.
cultural issues going on in our
Yeah,
society, and I don't know if objectivist conferences have focused on those. Like, what is the deal with the sexes, and how do we
yeah.
look at like that red pill movement and stuff? What is that
I don't
rising?
think they're going to, because a lot of the men there are so a lot of the men there, well, they're not even men, they're males. Are so weak, they're not going to say anything that might want to offend the women, because there's so few women that show up. And the women who do show up, though, are these gossiping, shaming, and rallying type women who just aren't very pleasant to be around. And
Yeah, I can think that speaks to the rigidity, the lack of openness and freedom mindedness, active mindedness about these contradictions that we start out
yeah,
talking about, right? Because when
yeah.
you're either doing genocide or actually advocating for it, like you got to stop and think a little bit about what's going on here. Like this is supposed to
Well,
be a philosophy that's serving human life, not statist insanity, you know?
well, I realize now that one of the big reasons why Christianity has been powerful is that it's the belief that everybody can be redeemed. But I also think that's its greatest weakness, is the belief that everybody can be redeemed. Because if you try to redeem somebody who truly is irredeemable, then they're just going to end up putting you up against the wall and shooting you at the firing squad. But but if the ones truly can be redeemed, it's really like the end of Return of the Jedi, when when Luke probably would die, but his father ends up bailing him out,
Hmm.
because he realized, I know there's good in my father. It's uh,
Yeah.
and then in the end, and Anakin Skywalker comes back, and then that's the end of Anakin Skywalker, because after the Emperor is dead and he takes his head off, and, well, not the head, but the whatever thing he wears, the hood,
Hmm.
or and that's kind of the end of Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader. But it's also interesting too, when you go into the whole theory of that, that if you give into your anger, you're going to the dark side. I think there is some truth to that, but it's
Hmm.
very hard. It's very hard to uphold yourself. And I think we start out in a movement fighting, thinking about and fighting what we're for, but then a lot of people drift over and start unifying and focusing instead on what they're against. And instead of becoming pro reason, we want to fight anti reason. So,
Yeah. And
and
terrorism,
and the
right?
symbol
Fighting
and
concepts.
terrorism is certainly anti reason. It won't. There's no argument about that. But then you end up fighting anti reason with more anti reason, and
Yeah, yeah, they're not fighting state-run terrorism, which is far more dastardly and far more pervasive, right?
yeah, I don't know how objectivism is going to get out of this. I think it'll take probably generations to get out of it. It doesn't seem to be quite this way among objectivists around the world, but it's not nearly as big around the world. I mean,
True.
uh,
There was a conference in Athens. A friend of mine sent me some pictures from there when I was living in Saipan. So yeah, they make their
what is that? That
rounds.
could have been interesting. Yeah, they have some of those others, like they have the Ayn Rand Center Europe, and the guy who runs the Ayn Rand Center Armenia. I always like to talk about him, because he's always got more women than men. It's
Hmm.
One time he had
That's
16,
exciting.
16, 16, and 8. It was that out of balance. I don't know what he's doing in Armenia, but he's doing something right. I'm glad to see it. I
Yeah,
hope that
I'd be
works out well
interested
for
to
them.
hear what kind of principles he's highlighting there. or what's
I
in the
don't know.
water in Armenia
I,
that's
I
causing.
suspect it's something with the culture there more than anything, because this is a
Hmm,
culture that I've heard that back in the days of the Nathaniel Branden Institute, it was about half and half,
perhaps, yeah,
and that
that makes sense. Nathaniel subsequently wrote or gave a talk that was transcribed as well. It's called "The Benefits and Hazards of the Philosophy of Ayn Rand," and it's
I
like,
haven't read that. I have read. I did seek out Albert Ellis's book, "Is Objectivism is a Religion?" And I thought it had a lot
oh,
of good insights,
yeah. So Brandon debated Ellis apparently,
and
and
it got memory hold.
yeah. So I think they're kind of talking past each other in
But
many
he
ways, and
he never
Ellis had
allowed
an
the
active
tapes to be
presence.
released, and I really would love to know why.
Hmm, that's interesting. I remember on Brett's show, School Sucks, we had an interview with this sort of like disciple of Ellis, who is also taking issue with objectivism's focus on self-esteem,
Yeah,
and instead, like Ellis wanting self-efficacy to be the focus. Because I guess this idea is that if you focus on self-esteem, you're considering your self-worth as being something that is open for debate or open to modify, whereas Ellis was trying to say we are worthy in principle, and therefore it amounts to um, what kind of efficacy do we view our minds as having, essentially. So it's a little bit in the weeds and kind of extraneous details about the psychological facets, but I don't think that the focus on self-esteem as a key virtue is problematic for objectivism. It just needs to be taken in context, right?
yeah.
So
Well, I think you have to. I think there's a lot of hyper judgmentalism among objectivists, though. It seems like there's uh, and there's really a lot of not a lot you can know. It's my a great teacher I had, said we judge people in moments, but people are lifetimes. It's
mhm.
so I really
Yeah.
do, and other people, go by this whole thing, check your assumptions, because you don't know what this person may or may not know. It's you know,
Hmm.
and and I can sometimes be that way. I was, you know, it can be a real interesting challenge sometimes, that stay positive and stay focused on what you're for. I know I certainly am. It's very easy to get caught up in the anger against people that I consider the bad guys, and
Yeah,
uh,
and anger, I talked about this on my series
yeah,
on Complete Liberty. Marshall Rosenberg talked about anger being like a red button that's flashing on the dashboard of the car, telling you to pull over and find out what is underlying that. What's the problem? Do we have a
yeah,
broken radiator? Is the piston blown out? Who knows what? Flat tire. So another objectivist, I forget her name, but she talked about anger being like this volcano where the magma is coming out the
yeah,
top, but what's underneath that's driving that could be, frustration, pain, fear, sadness, all these other feelings are there as well, right? And anger is a way to like set boundaries and
yeah,
assert things and make sure that our needs are going to be protected, essentially. So
yeah,
grokking those feelings and needs is really key, and that's one thing that you don't see in the objectivist world. Like there isn't that psychological focus on things. There is a new book by Tara Smith. She talked a
yeah.
couple nights ago here, and maybe it was last night. I
Yeah,
missed
it
it.
was last night. Yeah, it was raining so badly last night. I wonder how
Yeah,
many people went to that meetup, because that meetup is kind of an outdoor meetup.
they do have a covering there too. Yeah,
Yeah,
but it
we had a situation here back at the house where some water actually got in the house, and I was spending time getting that water out of the house.
yeah, it was raining buckets. I was
Kind of a mess.
hoping the hail didn't show up.
Yeah,
But
well,
her latest book is titled "Egoism Without Permission: The Moral
yeah,
Psychology of Ayn Rand's Ethics." So she's coming at this from her philosophical perspective. She's a philosophy professor.
yeah,
I believe she's doing work at UT Austin.
yeah. She's been at UT Austin for a while. I don't know what, and that's something too. I don't. I've noticed. Yeah, that's yeah. So I ended up missing that meetup, even though it's local. I mean, I just because of the weather, I wasn't. If you went, hope it was nice, but I don't know how many people. Uh, I haven't really looked at. I probably should read some more stuff by Brandon, because back in the 90s, it seemed like all these people who like Nathaniel Branden are crazy. And now it's like, wow, all these people who like Nathaniel Branden have really done some cool, interesting stuff, you know?
Yeah, he was open in
Yeah.
many respects. Like I said, he was able to hear and listen to Peter's arguments for voluntarism, a society without coercion, right? Without institutionalized coercion called government, how that would shape up essentially. So he was dabbling in that world, but he also dabbled in like energy therapies, like Roger Callahan. I remember early
Oh,
on the
wow.
objectivist forums and stuff, we were debating this about the idea of the utility and the modality of these thought field therapy
Yeah.
sort of things, and
Well,
I was just
yeah.
staunchly opposed to it because I was like, this is just magical thinking. Essentially,
Yeah.
there's no causal mechanism here that we can decipher. Um,
Well,
but anyway, he was open to that too. But he had this sort of perspective that if we pass moral judgment, especially on ourselves, we're not going to be able to heal and grow, essentially, because no one is ever brought to a better um, level of functioning by being accused of being horrible or bad or wrong or evil, right? So we need to have compassion for ourselves. We need compassion for other people and their suffering, and that's the way we can build these empathetic bridges
yeah.
with disagreements. When we have disagreements.
That's just from, you have this faction of people in the woke left who just want to call names. But then you have somebody like Daryl Davis.
Yeah, that guy's amazing, huh?
That guy is a true American hero.
He really is. They had
In
a
fact,
statue of him
I'd
everywhere.
almost go and say he's a god, because of what he does.
Oh my
I
God,
mean,
yeah,
you
like
you
these
go out and
converted KKK members,
you
card
go out to
carrying.
these KKK members, and you start collecting their hoods, and you know
Yeah,
what? You know what's also
as
beautiful
a
about it?
black man, so
You know
called,
you know
right?
yeah, and you know what's also really beautiful about that story is it just shows how powerful music is. That started from him playing music, because I guess
Exactly.
he was playing music in, like, this all-white audience or something, but, it's amazing how music can sometimes build those kind of bridges.
Yeah, because it goes to the emotional parts. Like
Yeah,
even Ayn Rand noted that in the Romantic Manifesto. She talks about how music and art goes straight to the
yeah,
emotions, like bypasses the sort of the
yeah.
cognitive stuff and just goes to the heart.
Yeah, it was kinda like this, where the guitarist for the Smiths, because he was on the same record label as Van Halen, went to a Van Halen concert, and the Smiths are a different kind of music than Van Halen.
Hmm.
But then after a while, he just noticed Eddie Van Halen is always smiling. I mean, here he said, "Here's a guy who loves the guitar as much as I love the guitar." It's like so suddenly it's like, "Oh, okay,"
Yeah,
uh,
I saw Sammy Hagar
yeah.
playing with Van Halen a couple years ago here at South by Southwest. They had a free concert. It was pretty cool.
Free Van Halen?
It was free, yeah. It was down by Lady Bird Lake. And you had to go through the COVID testing thing, so there was that. But once he got in, yeah, couldn't hit the high notes like he used to, but it was still pretty jamming.
I won't go down into the Eddie Sammy debate, but
Okay.
I gotta say I will never. It's unlikely that I will ever give any money to South by Southwest again. The people who run South by Southwest also run the local weekly, the Austin Chronicle,
Do they really?
and the
Interesting.
Austin Chronicle bought lock, stock, and barrel into all of the COVID nonsense. Even like when the mayor Stephen Adler went to Cabo San Lucas, they wrote this article saying, "Yeah, he goofed. He shouldn't have went there," but just they were complete hypocrites about all of it.
And of course, their main sponsor this year was the US Army. So there were a lot of bands
I
that
know,
basically said, fuck that, we're not going to be part of this.
yeah, and I know two other people. I know other people who ran events here in Austin, and those events are dead now. And they were great events. I don't know if you're familiar with Voice and Exit, or later became Future Frontiers, which was Max
Sure.
Borders,
Max
Ed
Borders, yeah, yeah.
Bluestein. That event is dead, and uh,
Although in
large.
Bastrop this weekend, there's some kind of exit.
That's the Greater Reset. That's John Bush and Derek
Gun
Rose,
Bushy thing, yeah.
and also and another event that got killed was Paleo FX.
Yeah. Yeah. I went to the
Paleo
last one.
Paleo FX was. Were you in 2022?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
I
wanted
know.
to talk to Jamie Wheal for a bit. Talk to him for a little bit.
I've known the Norris. I've actually learned about Paleo FX when I got to know the Norrises. They're great people, and
Yeah,
they
my
were
friend
really
Kevin's spent time with them too.
they were really trying to do something good there. And I sometimes think this woke stuff and all this COVID stuff really is just about destruction. It's funny. We never mentioned a person who I call the most dangerous terrorist in the Middle East.
Mm. Joe Biden?
Yuval Noah Harari.
Okay. Israeli historian, right?
Yes. What do we need humans for?
Boy, his books sold like gangbusters,
I,
didn't they?
and I don't. I'll see if I can get a free copy some way if I didn't buy one already out of curiosity, because I think he wrote that one book by like Sapiens, and boy, that guy is scary. Uh,
Yeah.
what he's, I you know, and yeah, I don't know what to.
Well, he's real hit and miss because I listened to him interviewed actually. I think it was on Lex Friedman's show. Um, and they were talking about the situation in Israel and Palestine, and he was really taking issue with Netanyahu's strategies as well as the right-wing fascist strategies. So there was that, but
Yeah.
his like ties with the leaders of the World Economic Forum and all that stuff
Oh
doesn't
yeah.
bode well, does it?
Yeah. I really wonder what these people are up to, and I don't know how you. It seems like there's a lot of nefarious things going on here. I don't know what the vaccines were for or anything else. I know I didn't take them, and I mean
Yeah,
I
I
don't
didn't either.
I don't really care what happens to a lot of the people who did take them.
Well, unfortunately, billions
Unless
of
they were
them didn't.
coerced by their work or
Yeah.
coerced in some other way. But a lot of these people just would have,
Yeah, basically overt rights violations left and right.
and
So
they basically would have classified me as a non-citizen. So it's like, so what? Uh, there's a
yeah, again, if we span out, scope out, and look at
yeah,
how that thing arose to begin with, we get into Anthony Fauci and Peter Daszak and the Wuhan lab in China. I mean,
yeah.
it's just like
There's
it's crazy statist nonsense once again, not looking out for human well-being, which, if you have these systems that are inherently unaccountable, which government is, then how in the world can you expect things to
yeah,
be really helpful for people, right?
yeah.
This
Well,
is what's the real contradiction with objectivism. As long as they see government as a necessary good,
yeah.
they're going to keep perpetuating this craziness that we see culturally, right?
Well, as I said, limited government is kind of like limited cancer. I mean, how do you
There you
uh,
go.
it eventually becomes malignant, and it always does. I don't know if we have a. They're wanting to do something that's never been done. I mean, it's when Jefferson, made the comment that history only shows us what bad government is. And I don't know if it's possible to have a good government. We also have some of this things with elites and various people getting to the.
Yeah, the whole
I don't know
bankster
how. Yeah,
system, right?
I do. I'd like to believe that politics could be like mathematics. Mathematics is the perfect form of anarchy. There are no rulers, but there are rules,
Hmm.
and everybody seems to agree with them, and they all and everything works. And mathematics is the oldest science of all,
And
and
the only
it's
rulers that there are the ones that you measure things with.
yeah, and everything is the same, and it just works. Although I think they're trying to overthrow that, but otherwise, how do you you
Yeah,
know
put that square peg in a round
seems
hole.
like you can maybe have this political system where you have a basis of individual rights, and the non-aggression principle becomes key to that. But the devil is still in the details, and you have to figure out how you hash that out.
Yeah,
I mean,
and how do you have jurisdiction essentially? Because
well,
jurisdiction would come from property rights and people's consent, and we don't have that now.
and sometimes you're in a relationship where there is unfortunately no consent. 2 days ago, I'm sitting at a red light. Some guy behind me sees the red light turn green, and he decides to floor it. Well, he hits me, and now
Wow.
I'm in
Even though he's behind you.
yes, but the whole point is I'm in a relationship with him now, whether I like it or not,
Yeah,
and now I've got to deal with his incompetent insurance company to get my car fixed. And I probably shouldn't say their name, but uh,
it was no fun.
this is a relationship that I didn't choose, and it's like, dudes, you need to figure out what's going on here. I still have a drivable car, but It's just,
Yeah, and of course you were on a communized road system.
yeah, but yeah, and and I don't know what's going to happen to this guy, but it seems like, you could have just wait, but not all relationships are voluntary, and sometimes, people aren't necessarily looking. This is a case where, we have a relationship by accident, but
Yeah, and we have a technological uh,
yeah,
capability so that things like that don't happen.
yeah,
Essentially, we have the technology already, so
but
that
you
would
got to
have
pay
never happened.
attention. It's like, I've had that happen several times where somebody, well, I thought you were going, no, I wasn't going, and they hit my car in the back. It's like, well, you better at
Hmm.
least make sure the car in front of you is moving. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe in a free market we'd have even airbags for bumpers, right? Really,
Yeah.
really durable airbags that would,
Well, if we,
fender benders.
if we had both been in Toyotas like mine, I think we would have been fine. But of course, he's in a truck and some of these trucks are designed. It seems like they're designed. I want to do as much damage as possible to the other guy, and that's what
Yeah,
happened.
they can
So,
definitely do that because they're tons more in mass.
well, just the way they have all these metal parts and all that other stuff on them, it's kind of ridiculous. But
Yeah, big steel bumpers that actually are above the bumper of
yeah,
cars, essentially. So it's going
yeah,
to
they have
do more
things
damage.
that absolutely do not give, and my stuff does give. So I have a drivable car, but I'm not even going to try to open up the trunk. So that's where I am right now, and
Yeah,
my wheels are fine, so that's good.
well, that's
But
good. And you didn't get injured because
and
whiplash
my
can
lights are
happen as
fine.
well.
Yeah, so it's yeah.
So yeah,
So
the objectivists kind of fail at providing solutions to this too, because they're again beholden to the government idea as a necessary good. So anything that happens on the government roadways, they kind of fault the drivers. Walter Block wrote that book about privatizing the road system,
yeah,
which made sense, right? But when you're sort of wedded to an idea like in a dogmatic way, it doesn't help you provide solutions that help people envision a free world, basically.
and how would privatized roads actually work? It'd be interesting to see how this works. I think you would have a situation where drivers' licenses would probably come from insurance companies.
Probably. Yeah.
So
And
and
then every car would have a peer-to-peer networking
yeah,
system to prevent
yeah.
accidents like that from happening.
One thing to keep in mind too, that the driver's license does not give you permission to drive your car. It gives you access to the roads. So if you're driving a pickup truck on some big farm somewhere, you're fine.
Hmm.
A
Yeah,
10-year-old
a lot
kid
of
can do
kids. I did that when I was a kid
that.
on our ranch.
You're on the ranch, you're on private property. That is totally fine.
Just put it in granny gear. You don't have to deal with the pedals. Just
And
steer.
not to mention, there are different there, like there are different citations, citations will be different or not be issued, when you're on private property if there's an accident, like in a parking lot or something like that.
Yeah.
Because you're not on a public road. But anyway, unless there's an injury, but yeah, and I called the police as soon as the accident happened because I wanted to get a report, and we have the little slip right here, so there it is. We got it
There
from
you go.
and they showed up, and something like big city cops, Austin, they wouldn't even bother to take a report on this. But
Mm.
fortunately, we're in a suburb where they showed up in about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Uh,
And that's like we don't see the unseen costs, right? Like what would have
yeah,
been done in a free market system. Maybe they'd have like a drone system set up along the roadway that if anything like happens, the drone flies out, takes pictures, and you're off the road. You're not creating traffic for other people.
well, yeah, that's
That's
the
a good
thing.
thing.
You get out of the car and you immediately start taking pictures of his car,
Hmm.
take pictures of his license plate and all that stuff. It's And I had it happen I had it happen a couple weeks ago. I was going to, In-N-Out Burger, and I saw somebody back, and I eventually say, "Hey, I saw what happened." Just make sure they know. Just didn't have to
Yeah.
get my name or anything, but I said, "Yeah, I saw what happened." I did give the one guy my card, but that was about it. Yeah,
Hmm. Yeah. Lots of solutions out there. It's just they're inhibited by the mixed economy that we have, like
yeah.
incredibly mixed to the point of
Well,
fascism.
well, cars are highly regulated to begin with. It's
For sure. All the designs and stuff.
a lot of
With
stupidity with
for
that. It's gotten
everything.
completely ridiculous. But anyway, I don't know if there's anything else we can cover here with the state of the objectivist movement.
Mm.
We
Yeah, I
could
don't have much hope for it actually, other than maybe a new generation of people that are able to think outside the status
I
box
I think I
and
you know, I
question those
think
premises.
yeah, I don't think the objectivist movement has gotten better, and I don't see any good people coming up in the objectivist movement that will make it better.
Well, just look at the people that are in charge of it and what they're
You know,
what they're promoting, and it's just the opposite
you,
of what I mean. I give Iran credit for being open borders kind of mindset, essentially
yeah,
allowing the free market to do that. So he's been explicit about that. But as far as like borders and private property in
yeah,
Israel, I mean, completely
yeah.
upside down and backward.
It'd be interesting to see how the objectives movement would have played out if there hadn't been in Israel.
Yeah, that
But
is another
also,
interesting thing. Like if the
I
Penguin
don't
Point
know.
Institute had continued onward and there were no
Yeah,
Israel, like that would have been a different reality, I'm sure,
really, yeah. And
different culture.
I know they've got at least one Israeli working at the Objective Standard Institute. Sometimes I wonder if any organization that's not explicitly anti-Zionist will eventually become Zionist.
Hmm. Yeah, well, there's like potent incentives for that, right? If you look at like Max Blumenthal that talks about
Well,
all the networks of these financial ties and all the things that like the Canary mission does to dox
yeah.
people and ruin their lives and their careers and all that insanity.
Well, you also get these people who apparently work their way into organizations and they're actually working for somebody else, and they could be trying to. I think there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's happening with the intelligence or with
Yeah, don't underestimate Mossad and the ties to America
or
and the way that they train the police too.
and I wouldn't be surprised if there's several different organizations in America that are doing this because America has so many of them. That's one thing I don't. That's one thing I do have to wonder about. Maybe why freedom might be better off in some other countries because you don't have all these infiltrators. I mean, I don't know if you've been paying much attention, but I'm very fascinated by what's been happening in Argentina for the last 6 months.
Yeah, we didn't get into Millet, and he gave a
You know,
talk at the World Economic Forum about that
yeah,
there is no such thing as a market failure, and I think that was a
yeah.
really root
He's
striking thing to say.
he's given a lot of good talks. There's a Cato seminar that I'm actually going to in June where he's going to be speaking. So I'm gonna
Hmm.
and
Yeah,
he's
and I
going to
don't
be
know how the Zionists got to him because he flew to Israel and spent some time with Netanyahu, and that was during the genocide. And it's
yeah,
like, what the fuck's going on here?
yeah.
Strange
You know,
bedfellows.
the one thing I will say is that because Millet speaks Spanish, I wonder what resources he has access to.
Yeah,
Uh, I mean, so he's not reading antiwar.com. He's not listening to Scott Horton. He's not reading Sheldon Richman's Coming to Palestine book. I mean, those are
hmm,
all things. And I've asked around. I said there are some things that we need.
yeah,
I
those are
don't think,
excellent.
not to mention these countries don't really have active anti-war movements, and the only active anti-war movements are usually the communists. When
Yeah, a
the
lot of these independent journalists are hardcore lefties, but they are able to
yeah,
build empathetic bridges with people like Dave Smith. Like
yeah,
Breaking Points, they interviewed, or Kyle and Crystal interviewed Dave Smith, and they're on the same page with the anti-war stuff. And I guess they're the next discussion they're going to have is about economics. So that's going to be really interesting to see
yeah,
because Dave has his
yeah.
understanding of this
I
pretty down pat.
I think that's one faction that's probably going to disappear pretty soon is what I would call the anti-war left. I won't be surprised there's no anti-war left in 15 years.
Yeah. So
I
which
think it'll all
direction are they
be
going to go?
anti-war libertarians or anti-war right. I don't think there's going to be any anti-war left.
Yeah, but the anti-right is probably going to be a dying breed as well. I think people are going to have to accept freedom as
Maybe
an
so, yeah.
absolute, essentially. A world-centric absolute freedom world is the only way we can go without self-destructing, basically. Because these systems have,
You know,
their own sort of insanity to them.
Wes, it's if you've paid attention to Texas news, you probably saw the news about Greg Abbott pardoning Daniel Perry.
Hmm. I
Uh,
missed
there
that.
was
What
that
was that about?
there was that shooting downtown
On
where he
36?
shot where he shot Garrett Foster, and he was convicted. And looking at and there's one video that really explains all of it, and I think it does make the best case that Perry was guilty. And I'm
Okay.
probably one, and I wonder, libertarians might be the only people out there who think that Daniel Perry is guilty and think that Kyle Rittenhouse is innocent.
Okay. So what was the scenario with Perry?
Uh, it looks like to me that he definitely pulled out his gun first and really and I don't think Foster did really have his gun in a position that would be considered aggressive.
Okay, Foster, was it with a BLM protest thing?
Yes,
Okay.
but
So yeah,
but
Perry was driving him in, kind of around the protesters or something, and then
something like that. I'd have to go watch the video, but
somebody came up to him and he thought
I'm
his life was
mostly
threatened, so he responded with
yeah
lethal violence. Yeah.
yeah. I'm mostly pointing out to the real to the tribalism that's involved here. That's
Yeah.
believe that probably 90% of the people either think they're both guilty or they're both innocent. Uh,
Hmm. Yeah, it's been so confusing out there.
Kyle Rittenhouse immediately tweeted about how he thought he's glad Perry was pardoned, and I actually tweeted back at him and said, "Kyle, I think you're innocent. I think he's guilty."
Hmm.
But
Yeah,
it's
that makes
are you
sense.
are you going to look at the facts? And I've noticed now that
Or are you gonna just gonna like be side with your team essentially,
yeah,
regardless what the
and
facts are?
objectivism has just been that way too.
Yeah.
And sometimes there is a controversy that comes up, but it's almost like objectivists, when some controversy comes up, they look around and kind of ask, okay, what am I supposed to think here?
What would Ayn Rand say?
What would Ayn Rand say, or what would the rest of objectivism say? And sometimes there's something that comes up. Something I remember on the boards that was very controversial back in 1999.
Hmm.
It was the movie American Beauty.
American Beauty. Okay.
And you had one side who thought the movie was completely obscene because it was about this man becoming obsessed with this young girl. But
Hmm.
on the other side, you had this side that was kind of defending him and said, well, this guy's life was empty and he was trying to figure out something to fill his life.
Hmm.
And it was almost as if objectivists didn't know what to believe about it. But then later, when I'd go back to the boards later, it seemed like there was all agreement about it. It's funny how disagreement eventually goes to agreement about something, and then everybody in the community says the same thing. It's so wild. There's so little diversity of opinion, and usually when the diversity of opinion does come up, it goes out pretty quickly.
Yeah, and it gets back to those elements of fascism that are in the collectivist premise that they have, and I don't think you would see them championing a book like Radley Balko. Have you interviewed him? The
I
Rise
haven't
of the
interviewed.
Warrior Cop?
I haven't interviewed. I know that book. I don't trust Radley Balko any further than I could spit.
Oh, really?
Uh,
Subtitled the Militarization of America's Police Forces. And
yeah,
they learned from the IDF, by the way, in Israel.
I will tell you why later why I don't trust Radley
Okay,
Balko.
gotcha. I'm just going by
Yeah,
the
yeah,
content of that
I've heard
book.
of that book, and that there might be some good stuff in that book. Maybe I'll pick it up and read it. But uh, yeah, he lost a lot of credibility with me over one thing, and I know
Mhm.
that may sound crazy, but it basically involved a very egregious misquoting, in my opinion. So
I see.
I lose a lot of respect for you when you egregiously misquote people.
Gotcha. But you're pretty much in agreement that this police state that we've ramped up into, right, is not
Oh,
going to be,
I definitely think we have a warrior cop class, but
yeah, another self-licking ice cream cone, apparently.
well, yeah.
But
Well, just for example, this morning you had that case where the guy who golfs, the number one golfer in the world, got arrested, and apparently, he was just apparently, there was just traffic blockage, and he was, he's a professional golfer. He wants to get to his tee time, and
mhm,
he started to go, I guess, go on the grass or something, and started to drive. And apparently, he didn't follow the instructions or something,
mhm.
and I don't know what happened. Of course, it got escalated to more than that.
They called the cops, and what the cops do? They escalated.
It ended up going to assaulting a police officer, which is not a charge you want to have. Yeah,
Yeah.
we need to, we need to end qualified immunity. But the other thing also is we need to end this special class. Assault is assault.
Yeah, and it doesn't have like a broad
It's not.
range that they can
It's not.
apply it to.
I assaulted a citizen. I assaulted another Homo sapien. That's what it should be. And
Mhm.
if you assault, and it doesn't matter if you assault the janitor or insult the secretary or assault it's
Yeah,
all
there's
the
no
same.
special privileges, shiny badges don't grant extra
There's no
rights.
special sentencing for a higher. I mean that's royalty. That's yeah. But anyway,
Yeah, it
uh,
reminds me of like the Fox News reporter, the local Fox reporter at the
yeah.
protests here in Austin, at UT Austin, and
Yes.
he got charged with assault, even though he was holding his big camera on his shoulder, and
Oh
they
yeah.
just basically threw him to the ground backwards and assaulted him, battered him essentially.
Oh, yeah.
And then, of course, at the other protests, somewhere
Yeah.
back east, Jill Stein was there. She's running the Green Party,
Yeah.
and she came to sort of the defense of these protesters, the students, and they started like the police started shoving their bicycles to shove her over backwards.
Yeah.
And one of the cops reached down and grabbed her ankle, apparently, and she kicked it away, and they charged her with assault,
Yeah.
trying to prevent her from falling over backwards and,
Well, yeah.
hitting the back of her head. She's a
Yeah.
physician, so she knows that shit can be dangerous
Oh,
when you're
yeah.
throwing
Well,
people over backwards.
well, I think we're done with the objectivist topic, and we went over 3 hours, so I think that was a good coverage here.
All right, mister.
Anything else you think we need to say before we go, or have we covered it all?
Well, I swear by my life and my love of it
Okay, yeah, well,
that I will not live for the sake of another
please
Homo
buy my
sapien.
novel, Escape from the Village. Check out my Substack. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'm Chris Baker. We're out.